Get comfortable. Settle in somewhere soft and dark. Maybe you've been here before, staring at a ceiling while the world outside keeps spinning without you, and you just needed somewhere quiet to land. Well, here you are, and tonight we're going somewhere very, very old. We're going to Lordran. Dark Souls is one of the most meticulously constructed fictional worlds ever built. Its lore doesn't shout at you, it whispers. It hides in item descriptions you almost skipped, in NPC dialogue you might have forgotten, in the architecture of a room that nobody ever stops to look at it properly. Tonight, we're going to pull all of that apart, slowly and gently, and lay it out for you piece by piece. 175 facts. Some strange, some heartbreaking, some so quietly devastating that you'll feel them in your chest even as you drift off. That's the goal. Let the words carry you down. There's nowhere else you need to be right now. Part 1. The Age Before Fire. The first flame in the world that was Fact 1. Before anything else existed in the world of Dark Souls, there was a place called the Age of Ancients. It's difficult to picture because the game never really shows it to you directly. It gets described in the opening narration as a world of gray crags, arch trees, and everlasting dragons. No fire, no death, no life as we understand it. Just a gray, still, permanent world where nothing changed and nothing ended. The everlasting dragons ruled this place, and they ruled it simply by existing. They were immortal. Their scales, made of something the game calls stone, couldn't be scratched or shattered or burned. They just were. Permanent fixtures in a permanent world. Imagine looking up at something that has always been there and always will be, and understanding on some deep level that you are simply not relevant to it. That was the Age of Ancients. Fact 2. The first flame didn't appear because anyone made it happen. It just happened. Somewhere deep underground, in a place later called the Kiln of the First Flame, a great fire simply ignited on its own. And the moment it did, the world changed. Suddenly there was heat and cold, light and dark, life and death. The game calls these things disparity. Before the flame, everything was the same. After it, everything was different from everything else. The flame didn't just bring warmth. It brought the concept of contrast to a world that had never had any. Fact 3. When the first flame appeared, it drew beings to it the way fire draws moths. Creatures that had been lurking in the gray dark before the flame suddenly had reason to move towards something. And near the flame, they found souls. Not just ordinary energy, but pure concentrated power. And the 4 strongest of these souls went to 4 specific beings who would go on to change everything. This was the moment Gwyn, Naito, the Witch of Izalith, and the Furtive Pygmy came into their power. Each of them found a Lord Soul, and each of those souls shaped who they became and what they could do. Fact 4. Gravelord Nito, the first of the dead, found a Lord Soul and became something that shouldn't exist. He was made of death itself, a creature assembled from countless skeletons, wrapped in a burial shroud, presiding over a tomb built for every living thing that had ever died. His domain was the Tomb of the Giants, buried so deep beneath Lordran that it sat beneath everything else, as if death were the foundation that everything rested on. Nito was never truly a villain. He just held domain over something unavoidable. He was the inevitable end, patient and permanent, and he had been waiting underground for a very long time. Fact 5. The Witch of Izalith found a Lord Soul tied to the power of fire. She was a sorceress before the Age of Fire began, and after it, she became one of its primary shapers. She built an underground civilization in Izalith with her many daughters. The game tells us she had at least 7 daughters, and they were remarkable sorcerers in their own right before everything went wrong. Izalith itself was a city of grand scale built in the caverns beneath Lordran, full of fire and warmth, and the power of the flame channeled through arts that no one else had mastered. Fact 6. The Furtive Pygmy is referred to in the game's opening narration as small, forgettable, easily missed. The word furtive means secretive, sneaky, done in a way that you don't want noticed. This was intentional. Gwyn wanted humanity's origins hidden. The Furtive Pygmy found the Dark Soul, the 4th and final Lord Soul, and from that Dark Soul he drew out fragments of humanity itself. Every human being in the world of Dark Souls carries a piece of the Dark Soul within them. The pygmy gave it to them, scattering it across the human race like seeds. This means that the origin of all humanity is a tiny, overlooked figure who found a piece of raw darkness and quietly distributed it to the world while everyone else was looking at the light. Fact 7. The war against the everlasting dragons happened because the lords had power and the dragons had immortality, and those two things couldn't coexist forever. Gwyn struck the first meaningful blow. His bolts of lightning shattered the stone scales of the dragons, making them vulnerable for the first time. Nito spread death among them. The Witch of Izalith burned them with fire, and Seath the Scaleless, the dragon who had been born without the stone scales that granted his kin their immortality, betrayed his own kind and revealed their weaknesses to the lords. The war wasn't swift. These were immortal beings, but eventually the tide turned, and the dragons fell, and the Age of Fire began. Fact 8. Seath the Scaleless was born without the thing that made dragons immortal. He had no stone scales. He was albino, pale and eyeless, a creature that couldn't even look at the sun. And he spent his entire life obsessing over what he lacked. When he betrayed the dragons to help Gwyn, part of his motivation was almost certainly envy. Pure, burning resentment at being born wrong in a species defined by perfection. His betrayal earned him a title and a Duke's Archive, and he spent the rest of his existence in those archives trying to discover the secret of immortality through a different means. That obsession would eventually drive him completely mad, but we'll get to that. Fact 9. After the dragons fell, the world entered the Age of Fire. This was the Golden Age, the long, bright period when Gwyn's kingdom of Anor Londo stood at the center of everything, and the gods were at their most powerful. The game is set after this period has already started to crack. When you walk through Anor Londo, you're walking through a place that used to be glorious and is now hollowed out. But during the Age of Fire's height, Anor Londo was a genuine seat of power. It was enormous. The architecture alone is staggering, built to a scale that makes human beings look like insects by comparison. This was intentional. The gods weren't human-sized. They were built differently, and their city reflected that. Fact 10. The bonfires spread across Lordran weren't accidents or conveniences. They were connected to the First Flame through a deliberate act by Gwyn's clan. They linked the sacred bonfires to humanity, creating a web of fire that drew warmth and power from the undead who tended them. This is why bonfires require humanity to kindle. They're not just campfires. They are small outlets of the same primal force that the First Flame represents, distributed across the world and kept lit by the dark soul fragments that every human carries. Every time you kindle a bonfire, you're feeding a piece of your own darkness to a piece of the world's light. Fact 11. The First Flame was always going to fade. This is not a tragedy unique to Gwyn's age. It's a cycle. Fire burns and then burns out. That's what fire does. The problem Gwyn faced was that he couldn't accept this. He built his entire civilization, his entire identity, around the age that the flame had created. The idea that it would simply end was intolerable to him. So, instead of allowing the Age of Dark to follow naturally, he sacrificed himself to link his soul to the flame and keep it burning. His knights followed him into the kiln. They were burned to ash by the flame, and their charred armor and lingering spirits are the Black Knights that wander Lordran in the game's present. Gwyn kept his crown, the game notes, perhaps because he wanted to preserve some symbol of the monarch he had been, even as the actual power in that crown had completely faded. Fact 12. When Gwyn linked the First Flame, he didn't just burn himself up, he became hollow in the process. The game describes hollowing as what happens when an undead loses their purpose, their will, their sense of self. They become a mindless, aggressive shell. And that's what Gwyn became. The final boss of the first Dark Souls is not a god at his peak. He's a husk. The greatest king who ever lived has been sitting in the kiln for over 1,000 years, reduced to embers, still clutching his sword, attacking out of instinct with no real awareness of who he is or why he's there. That's what you're putting out of its misery when you fight him. Fact 13. Gwyn's piano-driven boss theme is one of the most famous pieces of music in gaming. It's deliberately gentle and sad for a final boss. There's no dramatic orchestral swell, no overwhelming percussion, just a quiet, melancholy piano piece that plays while a hollow, burned-out god attacks you on instinct. Director Hidetaka Miyazaki has said that the theme was designed to make players feel the tragedy of Gwyn rather than the triumph of defeating him. You aren't supposed to feel like a champion when you beat Gwyn. You're supposed to feel the weight of what he was and what he became. Fact 14. One of the most interesting mechanical quirks in the entire game is that Gwyn, the final boss, can be parried. He's a former god, the Lord of Sunlight, and he can be stunned and riposted like a common enemy. No subsequent final boss in the series can be parried. Miyazaki has acknowledged this was partly a development oversight and partly by design, given Gwyn's weakened state. A fully hollow, burned-out shell of a god attacking on muscle memory alone might genuinely be susceptible to a well-timed deflection. His greatness is a ghost. Only the motions remain. Fact 15. The chosen undead, the player character of the first game, is technically a piece of a prophecy that Gwyn himself engineered. The undead curse, which marks humans with the dark sign and begins turning them hollow over time, is not a natural plague. Darkstalker Kathi, one of the primordial serpents who appears in the abyss beneath New Londo, tells you directly that Gwyn created the undead curse to prevent the natural arrival of the Age of Dark. Gwyn was so afraid of what would happen when darkness took over, that he blurred the truth of humanity's nature to prevent the Dark Lord, the one who would naturally inherit the Age, from ever being born or claiming what was theirs. Fact 16. There are two primordial serpents in Dark Souls who give you contradictory advice about what to do. Kingseeker Frampt is the one who appears near Firelink Shrine and tells you to link the first flame, to continue the Age of Fire, to follow Gwyn's path. Darkstalker Kathi is the one in the abyss who tells you to become the Dark Lord, to let the Age of Dark come, to be what humanity was meant to be. Both of them are manipulating you. Neither of them is giving you this advice out of any concern for your well-being. They each want something from you, and they use the language of destiny and purpose to steer you toward it. The game doesn't tell you which one to trust. It might be that neither deserves it. Fact 17. The two endings of the first Dark Souls reflect this tension between fire and dark. If you link the first flame, you sacrifice yourself to continue Gwyn's cycle, perpetuating something that was already breaking down. If you walk away, you allow the Age of Dark to begin, but what that actually means for the world is never shown. The game ends on your character standing in the dark with the fire behind you, and it gives you nothing else. This was intentional. The Age of Dark isn't a villain's victory, it's just the unknown. And whether the unknown is worse than the known is something the game refuses to answer for you. Fact 18. The souls that enemies drop when they die are literal fragments of the Dark Soul, the fourth Lord Soul found by the furtive pygmy. When you collect souls, you're gathering pieces of the fundamental darkness that underpins all of humanity. When you spend those souls to level up, you're using the raw material of human existence to make yourself stronger. There's something quietly profound about that. Every enemy you kill is releasing a piece of themselves into you. Every upgrade you earn is built from the darkness that every human being in this world carries. Fact 19. Hollowing is one of the most emotionally resonant concepts in all of Dark Souls. An undead who loses their purpose, their will to continue, their sense of self, becomes hollow. They lose their humanity. They become aggressive, mindless, dangerous. The game presents this as a fate worse than death. But the interesting thing is that hollowing isn't always involuntary. Some characters choose to hollow because they've completed what they set out to do and there's nothing left. Others hollow because they've been failed by the world one too many times. It's less a disease than a kind of grief taken to its absolute extreme. Fact 20. The concept of humanity in Dark Souls is both literal and metaphorical. Mechanically, it's a resource you collect and spend. Lore-wise, it's a fragment of the Dark Soul, the thing that makes humans what they are. When you lose humanity through death or hollowing, you literally become less of a person. When you restore it, you regain something of yourself. The game makes the philosophical argument, quietly, and through its systems rather than its dialogue, that personhood is something you can lose and regain. That identity is not fixed. That what makes you human is something that can be spent, taken, or restored. Fact 21. The Age of Ancients is not fully gone. The everlasting dragons weren't completely wiped out. Seath survived as the last of his kind, though we debate whether he counts as a true dragon anymore, given his madness and his subsequent transformation. In the painted world of Ariamis, there are dragon-like creatures. In the Ash Lake at the very bottom of the Great Hollow, far beneath Lordran, there are two surviving everlasting dragons who stand at the shore of an endless ocean, motionless, ancient, giving absolutely nothing away. They don't attack you. They don't acknowledge you. They simply exist, the way their kind has always existed. Standing at the Ash Lake and looking out at those two figures is one of the most quietly affecting moments in the game. The world above is burning itself out. Down here, two of the things that came before the flames simply wait, the way they always have, the way they always will. Fact 22. The Great Hollow, the enormous tree that connects Blighttown to Ash Lake deep below, is an architectural marvel hidden in plain sight. It's an ancient tree grown to impossible scale, full of moon mushroom creatures and basilisks and deadly drops, and most players use it only as a path to the optional area of Ash Lake. But the tree itself is one of the arch trees mentioned in the game's opening narration, a feature of the world from before the Age of Fire. The arch trees are what grew in the world of the everlasting dragons. Most are gone. This one survived. You climb down inside a piece of the world as it was before fire existed, descending through rings of ancient wood into the oldest and deepest place the game offers. If you're enjoying this journey through Lordran, this is actually a wonderful moment to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Tell me which fact surprised you most, or let me know what part of the lore you've always wanted unpacked. It genuinely means a lot, and it helps bring more of these long, slow, deep dives to more people. Now, let's keep going. Part 2. Gwyn's Children, the Gods of Anor Londo, and Everything They Hid, Fact 23. Gwyn had 4 children, and the stories of all 4 of them are tragedies. His firstborn was a god of war, powerful and celebrated, who fought alongside his father in the war against the dragons. He was worshipped as a deity in his own right, celebrated with a ring called the Ring of the Sun's Firstborn. Then he did something that isn't fully specified in the game but was clearly catastrophic enough that Gwyn had him erased from history. His deity status was rescinded. His name was struck from every record. Even the item that once honored him doesn't mention his name. He became the Nameless King, and by the events of Dark Souls 3, he has made a home on top of Archdragon Peak, where he lives alongside the surviving dragons he apparently allied with when he betrayed his father. His name is gone. His legacy was deleted. But he persists, alone at the top of the world, with the creatures his father spent a war trying to destroy. Fact 24. The Nameless King appears in Dark Souls 3 as one of the most challenging optional bosses in the series. He fights mounted on a storm drake in the first phase, and on foot in the second, wielding lightning in a way that echoes his father's power while being entirely his own. His moveset is graceful and ferocious simultaneously. He has clearly been practicing for a very long time. When you finally defeat him, he drops the soul of the Nameless King, and its description confirms what the lore had only hinted at. He was the firstborn of Gwyn. He was stripped of his deific status, and he chose to stand with the ancient dragons rather than with the gods. Whether this makes him a traitor or a man of conscience depends on how you feel about Gwyn's entire project. Fact 25. Guinevere, the Princess of Sunlight, is presented in the first Dark Souls as one of the only genuinely welcoming presences in the entire game. Anor Londo is a beautiful but cold place, and most of what's in it wants to kill you. Then you fight your way through to a warm, sunlit chamber, and there's Guinevere, enormous and radiant and kind, who hands you the Lord Vessel and invites you to continue your quest. She's one of the only characters who seems genuinely happy to see you. The problem is that she isn't real. She's an illusion constructed by her younger brother Gwendolyn. The real Guinevere left Anor Londo long ago. She went to live her own life, apparently married into another divine lineage, and produced children. Gwendolyn used her image, inflated and warm and ideal, to manipulate you into doing what was needed. If you attack the illusion and dispel it, Anor Londo plunges into darkness. The eternal sunlight was a lie. Fact 26. Gwendolyn, the youngest of Gwyn's children, was born with affinities for the moon rather than the sun. Gwyn was so committed to solar symbolism and masculinity that he raised Gwyndolin as a daughter, dressing the child in girls' clothing and connecting them to lunar worship instead of the sun the rest of the family claimed. Gwyndolin grew up with serpents where their legs should be, hidden behind illusions and barriers, keeping the empty city of Anor Londo running through elaborate magical deception because they were too ashamed of their own appearance to simply be seen. The Dark Moon Covenant, the rings related to Gwyndolин's covenant, the entire Blades of the Dark Moon organization, all of it is Gwyndolин's creation. They built a whole institution out of devotion to a father who was ashamed of them. Fact 27. After Gwyn linked the first flame, the other gods fled Anor Londo. They left. The grand city of the gods was abandoned. Gwyndolin was the only deity who stayed behind, maintaining the illusion that the city was still inhabited, that the sun still shone, that everything was fine. They kept the city running for over 1,000 years alone. When you arrive in Dark Souls as the chosen undead, you walk into what looks like a thriving divine city, and is actually an empty stage maintained by a single god who never stopped being loyal to a father and a world that left them behind. Fact 28. In Dark Souls 3, Gwyndolin is found being slowly devoured by Aldrich, the devourer of gods, in the Anor Londo of that era. When you encounter them, Gwyndolin is still alive, still reaching out from within Aldrich's body, still using what remains of their power to sustain the illusion that the room is correct and safe. They have been slowly consumed for an indeterminate amount of time. Aldrich is essentially a living sarcophagus for an unwilling god who can't fully die while they're being digested. It is one of the most quietly horrifying images in the series. A god who spent 1,000 years in lonely dedication to a city no one else cared about, devoured by something that grew powerful by consuming those the world forgot. Fact 29. Filianor, the fourth of Gwyn's children, appears in the Ringed City DLC of Dark Souls 3. She is Gwyn's youngest daughter, and she was sent to the Ringed City at the very end of the world to wait. Her father told her to wait for his return. She has been waiting ever since, asleep in the innermost sanctum, cradling an egg. She never woke up. She never stopped waiting. And when you finally reach her and wake her, the entire world shifts, because the egg she's cradling contains something ancient and terrible. Filianore is perhaps the most complete portrait of obedience as tragedy in the entire series. She did exactly what she was told. She never stopped trusting, and she waited, alone, in the last place in the world, while time itself moved on without her. Fact 30. Anor Londo's eternal sunlight, the thing that makes it visually the most striking location in all of Dark Souls, is entirely artificial. There is no real sun shining on Anor Londo. Gwyndolин's magic bent light to create the illusion of day in a place that should be under the same overcast sky as everything else in Lordran. When you dispel Gwyndolин's illusions, the city falls into dim twilight. The real Anor Londo is a pale, cold, gray place. The grandeur was real. The architecture is genuine. But the warmth, the light, the sense that you've finally arrived somewhere safe, all of that was constructed specifically to make you feel welcome, in a place that hasn't been truly inhabited in a very long time. Fact 31. Ornstein and Smaug, the two boss guardians of Anor Londo, are widely considered one of the greatest boss encounters in gaming history, and the moment that breaks most new players. Ornstein is the Dragon Slayer, one of Gwyn's 4 elite knights. Smaug is the Executioner, a huge, grotesque man who applied for a position among Gwyn's knights and was refused because of his habit of grinding the bones of his enemies into his food. He was denied elite status but kept on as a guardian anyway, because whatever was wrong with him made him terrifyingly effective in a fight. The pairing of one of the most noble knights in the kingdom with the one knight too disturbing to be officially inducted is a very Dark Souls kind of irony. Fact 32. The Dragon Slayer, Ornstein that you fight in Anor Londo, may not actually be the real Ornstein. There is evidence across multiple games that the true Ornstein left Anor Londo in search of the Nameless King, Gwyn's firstborn. The creature you fight in Anor Londo might be a phantom, a remnant, an echo of him left behind to guard the princess who was already gone. In Dark Souls 2, an enemy called the Old Dragon Slayer appears wearing armor similar to Ornstein's but darker. In a place connected to Drangleic, suggesting the real Ornstein traveled far and continued his mission for a very long time. And in Dark Souls 3, the Nameless King wears armor described as belonging to the first of Gwyn's knights, suggesting Ornstein eventually found who he was looking for. Fact 33. Gwyn's uncle Lloyd is mentioned in item descriptions but never appears directly. He was the leader of a religious organization called the Way of White, one of the primary religious institutions in Lordran. The Way of White was devoted to Gwyn's legacy and the continuation of the Age of Fire. What's interesting is that Lloyd isn't a god. He's apparently a mortal, or at least mortal adjacent, who built a church around Gwyn's divinity. He seems to have had a difficult relationship with Gwyndolin, whom he apparently considered threatening or heretical. An item called the Alluring Skull is noted as a memento of Lloyd, described as fake in a way that might imply his entire institution was built on a distorted understanding of what Gwyn actually was. Fact 34. Gwyn's 4 knights were his closest companions: Ornstein the Dragon Slayer, Ciaran the Lord's Blade, Hawkeye Goff, and Artorias the Abyss Walker. Each of them received a weapon or a ring directly from Gwyn himself, gifts that reflected both their specific abilities and his trust in them. Ciaran received a set of gold and dark silver blades, elegant and deadly, and is described as Gwyn's personal assassin. Hawkeye Goff was given a great bow and the ability to shoot down the ancient dragons from range, which is what his name refers to. He could hit things from distances that no one else could manage. He was eventually interred in a tower in Oolacile, seemingly by choice, given that he found blindness, and perhaps everything it carried with it, more peaceful than continuing to watch what the world was becoming. Fact 35. The Silver Knights who guard Anor Londo are the members of Gwyn's original army who stayed behind when he went to the kiln. The ones who followed him into the kiln were burned black by the Chaos Flame and became the Black Knights that wander Lordran. The Silver Knights kept their silver armor because they kept their posts. They've been standing guard in an empty city for 1,000 years. Their souls still animate them, but there is no king to protect, no princess in residence, no true purpose left to serve. They patrol hallways that lead nowhere, defend a throne that no one sits on, maintain the shape of a loyalty that has outlasted everything it was loyal to. Fact 36. The design of Anor Londo was deliberately built to make you feel small. The doorways are too tall for humans, the corridors are too wide, the statues are enormous. Everything in the city was built for beings that were physically larger than ordinary people, because the gods of Dark Souls were not human-sized. Gwyn is enormous when you fight him, far larger than a person. The scale of Anor Londo reflects a world built by and for creatures that have already left it. When the chosen undead walks through those halls, they are the wrong size for the space. A small, tattered undead exploring a palace built for giants. Fact 37. Guinevere's real life after leaving Anor Londo is only hinted at. She apparently married and had children, producing a divine lineage of her own. In Dark Souls 3, in the Ringed City DLC, there are references to children of the Dark Sun, entities connected to Gwyndolin's bloodline, and Yorshka, who appears as an NPC in Dark Souls 3, claiming to be a sister to Gwendolin, imprisoned in a tower by Pontiff Sulivan, may be a child or descendant of Guinevere. This would make her technically a niece of Gwendolin. Sulivan apparently knew this and locked her away anyway, treating a member of Gwyn's bloodline like a pet that needed to be contained. Fact 38. The Darkmoon Tomb in Anor Londo, where you can join Gwendolin's covenant, is built beneath the golden fog of the city. Getting there requires a specific ring and the knowledge of a secret pathway. Most players miss it entirely on their first run. Inside is one of the most quietly melancholy spaces in the game, a vast blue-lit hall with Gwendolin at the far end, surrounded by the trappings of a religion that Gwendolin built for themselves as much as for any worshipper. The covenant they offer, the Blade of the Darkmoon, tasks you with hunting invaders who have committed sins in Lordran. It's justice-based, lawful, rigid. It's the covenant of someone who believed deeply in order and righteousness and built something to express that belief in a world that had largely stopped caring. Fact 39. When Gwendolin dies in Dark Souls 1, if you choose to fight them, their body contracts as they die, the serpents at their lower half writhing and failing. They were protecting themselves with illusions right up to the end, projecting a corridor of infinite identical statues to confuse you and buy time. Even in death, they were managing appearances. There is no version of Gwendolyn's story that doesn't end in loneliness. They kept the lights on for everyone else, and when the lights finally went out, there was no one left to notice. Fact 40. The Princess's Guard Covenant in the first game is technically devoted to Guinevere, whose illusion you've just met. If you join it before killing Ornstein and Smove, you're technically joining a covenant pledged to a fake. You're signing up to serve an illusion that Gwendolyn created to fill a space left by someone who was never coming back. And Gwendolyn constructed it knowing that people would join it. They built a devotion around a ghost of their sister, because devotion, even to something not quite real, was still something that bound people to the city, kept them behaving, gave them a reason to protect a place that had already been abandoned by the being whose name they used. Fact 41. Gwyn is described across multiple item descriptions as someone who feared the dark deeply. Not darkness as an inconvenience, darkness as something that threatened everything he had built. Kadi says Gwyn was in dire fear of humans and the Dark Lord, who would one day be born among them. The most powerful god in the world, the being who had overthrown immortal dragons and built a civilization that lasted thousands of years, was terrified of where things were inevitably heading. Everything he did in the final stretch of his reign, the undead curse, the linking of the flame, the manipulation of prophecy and destiny, was the behavior of a powerful person desperately trying to hold a door closed against something that was going to come through it eventually regardless. That fear is recognizable. That's a human fear, dressed in divine scale. Fact 42. The golden city of Anor Londo, seen from outside during sunset through the windows of the elevator that takes you up to it, is still one of the most visually stunning moments in the game. Players who experience that first reveal, coming up from the dark tunnels of Sen's fortress into the light of a massive city on a cliff, describe it as one of the most striking transitions in all of gaming. It was designed to feel like relief. It was designed to feel like safety. And then the game slowly shows you that the safety was theatrical, the light was manufactured, and the relief was what Gwendolyn wanted you to feel, so you'd keep moving in the right direction. The beauty of Anor Londo is real. What it was built to make you believe is not. Part 3. The Four Knights and What Became of Them. Fact 43. Artorias, the Abyss Walker, is considered by many to be the single most legendary figure in the world of Dark Souls. Long before you encounter anything that bears his name, the game drops references to him. Sorcerers mention him, items describe him, his wolf companion guards his grave, his ring is required to enter the deepest part of the New Londo ruins. He is built up as a hero of near-mythic proportions before you ever meet him. And then when you finally do meet him, in the DLC content set centuries in the past, you find a knight who has been broken by the very darkness he was famous for walking through. Fact 44. Artorias was born without a natural resistance to the Abyss, the realm of pure dark that lives beneath New Londo. To navigate it, he formed what his ring's description calls a covenant with the beasts of the Abyss. He made a pact with the very things he hunted. This allowed him to walk through darkness without being consumed by it, but it cursed his sword in the process. His greatsword, the greatsword of Artorias, is described as being imbued with the power of darkness alongside its holy light. He was carrying both things simultaneously, the covenant with the dark and the purpose of fighting the dark, and it was probably always going to tear him apart. Fact 45. Sif, the Great Grey Wolf, was Artorias' companion from the time Artorias found her as a pup in Anor Londo. She followed him everywhere, including to Oolacile when the Abyss consumed that kingdom. When Artorias was finally overcome by the darkness, his last coherent act was to use his shield to create a protective barrier around Sif, keeping her safe while he descended into corruption. He sacrificed his shield arm's usefulness to save his wolf. His left arm is shattered and hanging useless when you fight him in Oolacile, and he still manages to be one of the most terrifying opponents in the game because he fights with his one remaining good hand and his broken darkness-infused soul. Fact 46. The fight against Sif in the main game, when you need Artorias' ring to enter the Abyss and must kill his wolf to get it, has a hidden additional layer of sadness that only reveals itself if you play the DLC first. If you rescue young Seath in the Chasm of the Abyss during the DLC, then go back to the main game and fight the older Seath. The opening animation is different. Seath recognizes you. She holds up Artorias' sword and hesitates, clearly not wanting to fight someone who once saved her. She begins the battle with what looks like grief. You're fighting a wolf who knows you, who remembers what you did for her centuries ago, who cannot let you have what you need, because she is still protecting her master's grave. If you get her health very low in the fight, she begins limping and fighting more desperately. The game wants you to feel every second of it. Fact 47. Ciaran, Lord's Blade, is the only one of Gwyn's 4 knights who appears in the DLC in a non-hostile state. She comes to Artorias' grave after you've killed him, and she asks you for his soul. In exchange, she gives you her gold tracers and dark silver tracers, her weapons. She wants to stay at his grave. There's a dead female body wearing armor associated with Ciaran found at Artorias' grave in the main game, suggesting that she did exactly that. She sat at his grave and didn't leave. An assassin who served Gwyn as his personal blade found the one knight whose death she couldn't just walk away from, and she stayed. She's described in item descriptions as possibly having had feelings for Artorias that went beyond professional loyalty. Whether or not that's true, something about his death was different from any other death she'd been party to, and it kept her there until she was no longer capable of leaving. Fact 48. Hawkeye Goff is one of the most unexpectedly warm characters in the DLC. You find him sealed inside a tower in Oolacile, blind, having apparently lost his sight in the time since Anor Londo. He's enormous, even by the standards of Gwyn's knights, wearing a set of armor so massive that it's barely distinguishable from a piece of fortification. He speaks slowly and kindly, and with a kind of acceptance that is unusual in a world where almost everyone is in some stage of denial or madness. He tells you about what happened to Artorias with genuine sadness, not anger. He helps you deal with the black dragon Calamite, shooting it down with his great bow despite his blindness, trusting the sound of its wings. A blind giant with an enormous bow, still serving, still precise, just quieter about it now. Fact 49. Goff's blindness is never fully explained. There are theories. The loss of purpose after the Age of Fire began fading, the strain of decades of service, the darkness spreading from Oolacile affecting him in ways it affected others. What's interesting is that he doesn't seem to resent it. He speaks of the world he can no longer see with a fondness that suggests he's made peace with not having to watch what it's become. Sometimes the people who've seen the most terrible things are glad, in the end, to stop seeing. Fact 50. The Abyss Watchers in Dark Souls 3 are direct spiritual descendants of Artorias. The undead legion of Farron ingested wolf blood, tying their souls together in a shared body and fighting style that mirrored their hero. They wore wolves' heads. They hunted hollows who had fallen to darkness. They tried to carry Artorias' mission forward into a new age. They were so completely linked through the wolf blood that when one of them went hollow, they all began fighting each other, because the corruption had spread through their shared essence. When you fight the Abyss Watchers as a boss, you're fighting a room full of the same being in various stages of corruption, each one killing the others and rising again. None of them fully able to stop the cycle. They became what they were trying to prevent. Artorias, at least, managed to save Seath before he fell. His descendants didn't even manage that. Fact 51. The Moonlight Greatsword, one of the most famous recurring weapons across all of From Software's games, first appears in the Dark Souls universe as a weapon associated with Seath the Scaleless. Seath created or discovered it in his mad experiments, but the weapon appears in Demon Souls, in Bloodborne, and across every Dark Souls game. It's made of pure crystalline moonlight energy. There's no definitive explanation for how the same weapon exists across different universes. Miyazaki has acknowledged this and simply described the Moonlight Greatsword as a beloved recurring element. It's From Software's gift to itself and to players who notice. Fact 52. The Nameless King Stormed Drake companion, which he rides in the first phase of his boss fight in Dark Souls 3, is actually not a wyvern in the traditional sense. The Nameless King's pet is described as a king of the storm, a divine creature connected to lightning. It fights alongside him with genuine coordination. When you deal enough damage to the Drake, it falls, and the Nameless King dismounts, and you see a brief moment where he looks at his fallen companion with something in his posture that might be grief, might be fury, might be both, and then he attacks you with everything he has. He has been living on that mountain with the dragons for centuries. The loss of that particular creature is not abstract to him. Fact 53. Lord Gwyn divided his soul before entering the kiln. This is why collecting Lord Soul fragments from Nito, Seath, the Four Kings, and the Bed of Chaos is required to open the way to him. He gave pieces of himself to others before burning what remained. He gave to Seath the fragment that allowed him to fund his research into immortality. He gave to the Four Kings the power that eventually consumed them and the city of New Londo. He kept enough of himself to link the flame. But by the time you reach him, he is both the greatest concentration of power left in Lordran and a man who gave away everything he could afford to give and still burned. His soul is described as powerful even in its diminished state. Imagine what it was before. Fact 54. The Four Kings of New Londo received their fragment of Gwyn's soul and used it to become extraordinary rulers. New Londo was once a thriving city, full of humans, one of the more prosperous places in Lordran. The Four Kings governed it with the power Gwyn had given them. And then Kathi came. The Dark Serpent offered them the power of the Dark Wraiths, the ability to steal humanity from other beings. The kings accepted. They made contact with the Abyss, and the Abyss unmade them. By the time you find them in the flooded depths of New Londo, they are enormous, formless, echoing things, barely recognizable as having once been individual monarchs. The city above them was flooded by the Sealers, who closed the floodgates to contain the Dark Wraiths and trap the corrupted kings beneath the water. The flood killed everyone who hadn't already been taken by the Abyss. The whole city is a sealed, drowned tomb. Fact 55. Artorias' greatsword is crafted from his soul and his great shield. The description notes that it was forged from the soul of Artorias, and that it is imbued with the power of the Abyss to which Artorias succumbed. It carries his darkness with it, because he carried that darkness himself. Weapons forged from boss souls and dark souls are, in a sense, continuations of those bosses. The power doesn't die, it transfers. Every greatsword of Artorias in every player's inventory is a small repository of a knight who fell to the dark but had the dignity to save his wolf before he went. Fact 56. The Knight Artorias boss fight has cut dialogue. 3 sets of unvoiced lines were found in the game's data. One set contains lines from before the fight, where Artorias seems to be in the last moments of awareness before full corruption, speaking about the Abyss spreading and begging someone to stop it. Another set contains dying words. His last words in the game's data are, "All of you, forgive me." He knew what he'd become. He knew he'd been turned into something that needed to be stopped. He asked forgiveness from everyone at the end. None of that made it into the final game, but it was there once. Fact 57. Tyrion's weapons are unusual in that they are a matching set, a curved sword of gold that fires fast and light, and a curved sword of dark silver that moves with lethal grace and deals darkness damage. In lore terms, they're described as the tools of a god's personal assassin, someone who ended those whose existence the king decided was no longer useful. Ciaran killed people for Gwyn. She was good at it, and she seems to have accepted that role without apparent conflict. What's striking is that none of Gwyn's other knights are described this way. Ornstein was a guardian, Goff was a soldier, Artorias was a hero, Ciaran was the one who did the things that heroes couldn't be asked to do, and she sat at Artorias' grave until she died, because he was, perhaps, the only person in her life who had ever asked her to be something other than a weapon. Fact 58. The wolf ring that Gwyn gave to Artorias is described as boosting poise, the stat that determines how well you can withstand attacks without being staggered. Gwyn literally gave Artorias a ring that made it harder to knock him off his feet. This is both mechanically useful lore detail and a very small portrait of a relationship. A lord giving his most devoted knight something that would help him stand firm when everything was trying to knock him down. Gwyn understood what Artorias did. He walked through places that would break anyone else. The ring was acknowledgement of that. Fact 59. Marvelous Chester, a character who appears in Oolacile during the DLC, is a mystery. He's dressed in attire that doesn't match the period, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a long coat that look like they're from a later era. He claims to have been pulled to Oolacile from the future against his will, the same way the chosen undead was. He's wry, slightly unhelpful, and oddly cheerful for someone stranded in the middle of a kingdom being consumed by an ancient darkness. He's the one who tells you that Oolacile brought the abyss upon itself by disturbing the grave of primeval man at the urging of a toothy serpent. He says it with casual inevitability, the way someone tells you a story they've heard too many times. Then he invades you later for your items, because of course he does. Fact 60. Oolacile was a kingdom that specialized in a kind of sorcery different from Vanheim's. Its magic was older, more intuitive, described as an approximation rather than a precise system. It was a softer kind of magic, bound to the land and to older principles. Dusk of Oolacile, the princess you rescue, and who becomes an optional vendor in the main game, refers to her people's sorceries as belonging to a different tradition entirely. The fact that this entire civilization and its unique magical tradition was consumed by the abyss because the people dug up a primeval human's grave at the suggestion of a serpent is one of the more brutally efficient summaries of the human failure mode. They were told a secret was buried there. They dug it up. The thing they woke up was angry, and it unmade everything they had built. Part 4. Seath the Scaleless, the Dragons, and the Madness of Knowledge. Fact 61. Seath the Scaleless is the only non-boss entity in Dark Souls who is confirmed to kill you as part of a mandatory scripted sequence. The first time you encounter him in the Duke's archives, he attacks you before the boss fight can properly begin, and you die. It's unavoidable. You wake up in a prison cell. Your death is scripted into the story. This is Seath demonstrating that he doesn't fight you on your terms. He never did. He always had home advantage, because he was in his archive surrounded by his own research and his own structures and his own minions, and you were a trespasser he could afford to dismiss. Fact 62. Seath's obsession with immortality is the purest example in Dark Souls of knowledge-seeking as self-destruction. He had everything else. He had a dukedom. He had a fragment of a lord's soul. He had the greatest archive of knowledge in Lordran, filled with books and tomes and research that scholars would have sold themselves to access. But he didn't have the thing he wanted most, and so none of the rest of it mattered. He kidnapped young women from across Lordran to use as test subjects for his crystal sorcery experiments, transforming them into Pisaka, the crouching blue creatures that populate the archives, orpid and crying in their cells. He destroyed people in pursuit of understanding what made things permanent, and he did this for so long that he lost track of being a person. Fact 63. Big Hat Logan, the wandering sorcerer you can rescue from a cage in Sen's fortress and subsequently find at the Duke's archives, goes mad in exactly the same way Seath did. If you buy all of his spells and then return to the archives after Seath is dead, you find Logan in Seath's research room, naked except for his hat, attacking on sight. He removed all his clothes because Seath had no scales, and Logan was trying to understand what it meant to be scaleless. He became Seath. He absorbed the dragon's obsession through proximity to his research, stripped himself of everything excess, and tried to replicate the condition of the thing he was studying. The hat is all that remains of who he was, and it's still there, riding absurdly on the head of a naked raving sorcerer in a dead madman's study. Fact 64. The primordial crystal, which Seath kept at the heart of his cave research area, is the source of his immortality. Not the scales he never had, but a different kind of permanence entirely. As long as the crystal exists, Seath cannot truly die. If you attack him without destroying the crystal first, he regenerates. You have to smash the thing that's keeping him alive before you can end him. There's something philosophically interesting about that. The thing he needed to be immortal wasn't born into him the way scales were born into other dragons. He manufactured it. He discovered, through research and experimentation, how to create the one thing he'd always lacked. And then he lost his mind, because the person who arrived at that discovery wasn't the person who had started the search. The research consumed him before the immortality could save him. Fact 65. Seath is described as blind. He has no eyes. His design as a boss, a huge pale dragon with multiple tails covered in crystal growths, lurching around an enormous cave, is partly a function of this. He uses sense beyond sight, detecting through vibration and proximity. The channelers who serve him, those multi-eyed servants in their red robes, have 6 eyes arranged in 2 vertical columns specifically to compensate for Seath's blindness, serving as remote sensors for their master. He built a network of watchers to compensate for the fact that he couldn't see anything himself. He was the most powerful magical researcher in Lordran, and he was doing it all in the dark, in every sense of the word. Fact 66. Seath is referenced in Dark Souls 2 as the Pale Drake, a great soul whose fragments survived into Drangleic. The implication is that his research didn't end with his death. Parts of his power, parts of his obsession, persisted through the ages. The Freya boss in Dark Souls 2, a great spider with 2 heads, is connected to what appears to be a fragment of Seath's soul, or a being created from his lingering influence, infecting a spider in the Brightstone Cove, knowledge seeking to continue its research through whatever vessel presented itself. The ambition survived, even when the original host didn't. Fact 67. The crystal caves where Seath keeps his primordial crystal are one of the most visually distinctive areas in the game. The entire floor is made of translucent crystal, and most of it is invisible. The actual floor you can walk on is narrow and treacherous, and half the time you will fall through apparent solid ground into an abyss below. You navigate it by looking for the ash and hollow markings that indicate where previous travelers fell, and by trusting your instincts about which things that look like they'll support you will actually do so. It's an environment built around the idea that perception can't be trusted, that what appears solid is hollow, and that the archive of knowledge you've been climbing through has an untrustworthy foundation. Fact 68. The Moonlight Greatsword can be obtained in Dark Souls by cutting off one of Seath's tails during the boss fight. This requires getting behind him during a frantic fight in a confined space, and hitting the specific tail segment multiple times before he repositions. The sword itself grows from his body. It is literally a piece of him, a weapon made from the dragon who betrayed his kind and spent his long life pursuing a form of permanence he could never quite grasp. The sword is beautiful, glowing with soft blue light, striking and clean. It looks nothing like its origin. That's true of a lot of things in this world. Fact 69. The everlasting dragons that survived into the game's present are in Ash Lake, at the very bottom of the world. They don't speak. They don't attack. They stand at the edge of a gray ocean, under a gray sky, exactly as the world was before fire. A 3rd dragon was destroyed there, its shell visible on a cliff nearby. 2 remain. Every time you go to Ash Lake and stand near them, you're standing next to the 2 things that are older than everything else in the game, older than the gods, older than the flame, older than the entire world you've been exploring. They watched all of it happen, and they're still here. Whatever comes next, they'll probably be here for that too. Fact 70. The Dragon Head Stone and Dragon Torso Stone items, which allow you to partially transform yourself into a dragon and join the path of the Dragon Covenant, are items associated with the everlasting dragon's essence. If you can fully become a dragon by collecting and using them both, you can become something like what the world was before fire. The path of the Dragon Covenant asks you to challenge others to duels of honor, using specific gestures to initiate battles. There's something quietly poetic about that. If you want to be a dragon, you have to fight with the same directness and permanence the dragons embodied. No tricks, no exploits. You simply stand in someone's world and wait for them to see you, and then you fight. Fact 71. Seath's character design was directly inspired by Seath, a white dragon from Software's earlier King's Field series. In King's Field, Seath was depicted as a force of good. Dark Souls took that name and that white dragon aesthetic and made it into something deeply corrupt. Miyazaki's version of Seath is the betrayer of his own kind, the obsessive scientist who destroyed innocence in pursuit of impossible goals, the mad librarian at the bottom of a tower full of screaming women turned to crystal statues. King's Field's Seath was kind. Dark Souls' Seath is a warning. Fact 72. The Black Dragon Calamite, an optional boss in the DLC, is described as the last surviving ancient dragon who is still active and hostile. Unlike the 2 in Ash Lake who simply exist, Calamite still fights. His description says, "He is one of the ancient dragons, bearing the mark of the ancient dark, a strange eye that suggests something ancient and terrible in his lineage. He carries a curse on his attacks that permanently reduces your maximum health. He is not a boss to be taken lightly." Hawkeye Goff shoots him down from the sky to make him accessible, and even then he's one of the harder fights in the DLC. The everlasting dragons who still fight are the ones who haven't yet accepted that their age ended. Fact 73. Seath's experimental subjects, the Pisaka in the prison sections of the Duke's archives, are described in item descriptions as once having been scholars who sought out Seath's knowledge. Some of them came willingly, some of them came because they were captured. All of them were turned into crouching, gibbering crystal things that cluster in corners and sob. There's a set of keys in the archives that unlock the cells where they're kept, and if you do nothing with those keys, they stay there forever, in the dark, after you've killed the dragon who put them there. The game doesn't give them a rescue, it just gives you the knowledge of what they were. Fact 74. The Archive Tower prison cell where you wake up after Seath's scripted kill is designed like a place someone built specifically to hold undead. There are items there, as if the prison was provisioned for your stay. There's a path out if you can find the key. It feels less like a dungeon and more like a test, the kind a mad scientist might run on a subject he finds interesting. You're not being tortured, you're being studied. Seath probably wanted to see if you could get out. Most of his experimental subjects couldn't. Fact 75. The Crystal Cave, where Seath keeps his primordial crystal, has invisible walkways because Seath doesn't need to see them. He knows where they are through other senses. He built a research facility for his own use, in his own way, with no concessions to the navigability requirements of anyone who might come after him. The cave is a mirror of his mind, brilliant, inaccessible, full of things that will kill you if you trust the surface. Fact 76. Seath's connection to the moon is subtly woven through his design. His signature attack is a spray of moonlight-colored crystal. His great sword glows like moonlight. His scales in his design are pale as the moon. Dragons are traditionally connected to earth and fire in most mythologies, but Seath was always something else. His pale scales, his blindness, his reliance on magic over physical power, his obsession with permanence rather than dominance. He was a moon dragon long before the moonlight greatsword grew from his tail. He was never fully of his kind, and everything about him reflects that. Fact 77. Seath, Gwyn, and the Witch of Izalith form an interesting triangle. All three of them tried to cheat their nature. Gwyn tried to delay the inevitable end of the Age of Fire. The witch tried to recreate the first flame from her own soul. Seath tried to manufacture immortality through research. All three succeeded in one narrow sense and failed catastrophically in every other. Gwyn kept the flame burning, but burned himself hollow doing it. The witch created a new flame, but became its prisoner. Seath found immortality, but lost his sanity. The game seems to be saying something about the gap between getting what you want and being able to live with it. Fact 78. The four Lord Souls didn't just give power to those who found them, they shaped those who found them into specific types of power. Gwyn's soul was the soul of sunlight, of order and command. Nito's soul was the soul of death, patient and complete. The witch's soul was the soul of fire, creative and ultimately uncontrollable. The pygmy's was the soul of dark, subtle, and distributed. Each soul fit its finder, or maybe each finder became their soul. There's no way to tell which came first in a world where the distinction between a person and the power they carry has never been entirely clear. Part 5. The Witch of Izalith, the Daughters of Chaos, and the Tragedy Beneath Blight Town. Fact 79. The Witch of Izalith was one of the most powerful beings in Lordran before everything went wrong. She found a Lord Soul at the beginning of the Age of Fire, built a city named after herself deep underground, raised 7 daughters who were themselves extraordinary sorceresses, and fought alongside Gwyn in the war against the dragons. She was a peer of gods. And then she made one decision, one attempt to replicate the first flame from her own Lord Soul when the original began to fade, and it consumed her completely. Fact 80. The flame of chaos that the witch accidentally created when she tried to duplicate the first flame is fundamentally different from the fire in its original form. The original flame brought disparity, contrast, the possibility of difference in a gray world. The flame of chaos creates demons, It is a warped, unstable version of what it was trying to imitate, something that generates twisted life rather than the kind of life that existed before it. The witch became the bed of chaos, a seething mass of flame and roots and horror at the center of Lost Izalith. Two of her daughters were absorbed into it with her. What's left is still technically alive, still technically the Witch of Izalith, but it bears no resemblance to the person who set out to save the Age of Fire. Fact 81. The Bed of Chaos is widely considered one of the weakest boss fights in the game from a gameplay standpoint, with unpredictable fall damage and an arena that punishes movement erratically. But its lore is one of the most tragic in the game. You're not fighting a villain. You're fighting a once great sorceress who destroyed herself trying to prevent the end of an age she loved. She didn't become the Bed of Chaos out of malice. She became it out of ambition and love and a desperate refusal to watch the light go out. The game respects this by making Quilana, one of her surviving daughters, ask you to kill her. She calls it mercy. She says her mother has suffered enough. And she's right. Fact 82. Quilana of Izalith is the only daughter of the witch who escaped the flame of chaos. The game says she faked her death to avoid the transformation that took her sisters. She has been living in the poison swamp of Blighttown ever since, only visible to those who have the right flame, teaching pyromancy to worthy students as a way of preserving her mother's original arts before they were corrupted. She appears and disappears based on conditions the game never fully explains. She's the only one of the daughters who got out clean, and she spent the centuries since in a swamp, waiting for someone to help her end what her mother became. She can't do it herself. She says she lacks the strength and the bravery. She was always the one who ran when it mattered. The guilt of that has kept her in one of the worst places in the game for longer than some kingdoms have existed. Fact 83. The Daughter of Chaos, also called the Fair Lady, is one of the most painfully undernoticed characters in all of Dark Souls. She is one of the witch's daughters who transformed into a half-spider, half-woman creature after the Flame of Chaos, just like her sister Quelaag. She and Quelaag fled the ruins of Izalith together and made a home beneath Blighttown. She is blind, completely immobile, dying slowly from a sickness she took on herself voluntarily, and she almost certainly doesn't know your name. She thinks you're Quelaag, her sister, because Quelaag is the only one who ever visits. She has a covenant around her, the Chaos Servants, built by Quelaag to provide the Fair Lady with humanity to ease her suffering. The whole thing is a dying woman in a cave being kept alive by her sister's desperate resourcefulness. Fact 84. The reason the Fair Lady is sick is one of the most quietly devastating details in the entire game. When the people of Blighttown became infected with Blightpus, a terrible disease that caused slow, agonizing death, the Fair Lady absorbed their sickness directly into herself. She drank it. She took the disease from the infected people and kept it in her own body, curing them but destroying herself in the process. She did this against her sister's direct orders. Quelaag told her not to. She did it anyway because the people were suffering and she could stop it. The eggs covering her body that the Chaos Servant Covenant tends to are what her body produced after absorbing the blight, cradles for tiny fragments of humanity. She gave herself a slow death to spare other people their fast ones. Fact 85. Quelaag fights you to protect her sister. That's the entire reason. She's not hostile by nature. She's not evil. She attacks anything that approaches the domain because anything that gets in could be a threat to the Fair Lady, who is utterly defenseless. She has built her entire existence around keeping the way to her blind, sick, dying sister clear. When you kill Quelaag, you break the only protection the Fair Lady has left. You don't know this when you walk into the fight. You just know there's a boss blocking your path to the second bell. The game trusts you to figure out the rest. Fact 86. Kirk, Knight of Thorns, invades the player multiple times across the game. He wears armor covered in spikes, dark and brutal, and fights with a heavy club. He's hostile, he attacks without warning, and he invades your world repeatedly like an obsessive danger. Item descriptions tell you that Kirk was a member of the Chaos Servant Covenant. He was invading players, killing them, stealing their humanity to bring it to the Fair Lady. Every time he invaded you, he was committing violence in service of keeping a sick woman alive. He never introduces himself. He never explains. He just attacks, takes what he needs, and leaves, or tries to. He's one of the stranger portraits of devotion the game offers. Fact 87. Ceaseless Discharge, the boss guarding the entrance to Lost Izalith, is one of the Witch of Izalith's sons. He's enormous, pale, covered in inflamed sores from birth, and described as having been given a special ring by his sisters because his condition was so severe. If you pick up a piece of armor from the altar in his area, he attacks. If you run back to the entrance of his arena, he lunges forward and hangs over the edge, exposing his arm for damage. His name refers to the constant flow of molten material from the sores on his body. He was in pain from the moment he was born. He guards the ruins of his family's home. He is, in many ways, the most pitiable of the Daughters of Chaos's kin, and the game named him in a way that reduces him to his most degrading condition. Dark Souls does this sometimes. It names things for what's wrong with them, rather than who they were. Fact 88. Lost Izalith, the destroyed city at the heart of the demon realm, is one of the most visually interesting and practically frustrating areas in the game, widely acknowledged as feeling unfinished compared to the rest. The area was apparently rushed during development, leaving a large section populated with reskinned Taurus demons on flat ground where something more interesting was probably intended. The lore of the area is rich. The actual experience of playing through it is a reminder that even the best games have parts that didn't receive the same attention as everything else. Fact 89. The lore of pyromancy is one of the most interesting through lines across all three Dark Souls games. Quilana taught it to the great pyromancer Salamon, who then spread it. The school of pyromancy in Lordran is essentially a corruption of what the Witch of Izalith's daughters originally practiced, the fire sorcery that predated the flame of chaos. Real pyromancy as it existed before was described as the use of fire without connection to any soul or deity. It required nothing but the flame within the human body, a dark flame that responded to training and will rather than an external power source. This is why pyromancy in Dark Souls doesn't scale with any stat. It scales with your pyromancy flame weapon upgrade level. The power was always in you. You just needed someone to show you how to find it. Fact 90. The Old Demon King in Dark Souls 3 is the last surviving demon from the original bed of chaos. He sits alone in the smoldering lake, surrounded by the bones of demons who came before him, his flames nearly out. When you fight him, his second phase has him desperately trying to use the last of his fire, hitting himself to generate more heat, thrashing with diminishing power. He's the last of his kind. The race of demons, born from the Witch of Izalith's catastrophic experiment, has been dying off since the Age of Fire begins to fade. He is the last one who remembers what they were. His name is the Old Demon King, and when he dies, there are no more kings of demons. There is nothing left to rule. Fact 91. The Demon Fire Sage is described as the last master of Izalith's original fire sorcery arts, before they were corrupted into pyromancy by Quilana and before they were destroyed entirely by the Chaos Flame. He is one of the first demons ever created by the Bed of Chaos, a fire priest of Izalith transformed. He guards the ruins of his city, not because he has orders to do so, but because there's nowhere else for him to go. His city is gone. His civilization is ash and crystal and darkness. He is standing in the remains of something that no longer exists, maintaining the posture of a guardian with nothing left to guard. Fact 92. The chaos weapons in Dark Souls, which scale with humanity, are connected to the Daughters of Chaos on a fundamental level. Quelaag's Fury Sword, crafted from Quelaag's soul, is described as a sword that draws power from its wielder's humanity. The more human you are, the stronger it hits. This reflects Quelaag herself. Her power was drawn from the humanity she collected, the humanity that kept her sister alive. A weapon made from her soul operates on the same principles she did. It needs what she needed. Fact 93. Izalith, as a place name, appears in item descriptions long before you get there. The gold-hemmed black set, the armor of Quilana, is described as having been worn before even the Age of Fire. This places the Daughters of Chaos as having existed before the flame. They weren't created by the Age of Fire. They preceded it, lived through its rise, survived its corruption, and are now watching its end. Quilana, who escaped the flame of chaos and hides in Blighttown, is one of the oldest non-divine beings in the game. She has watched more history pass by than almost anyone you encounter. Fact 94. The covenant associated with the Fair Lady requires you to donate large quantities of humanity to unlock different levels. The highest tier requires 30 humanity, a significant and time-consuming amount to accumulate. Most players never reach it. Those who do open a shortcut between Quelaag's domain and the lower undead asylum, a small mercy in a brutal game. But the lore reason for the donation is that you're feeding the Fair Lady, giving her the humanity that her body craves and cannot produce on its own, the fuel that keeps her barely alive. The game rewards your compassion with a practical convenience, which feels about right. Kindness in Dark Souls is usually functional rather than sentimental. Fact 95. Ein Yi, the strange egg-covered man who serves the Fair Lady as attendant, is one of the stranger NPCs in the game. He is literally covered in eggs growing from his body, eggs that were placed there by the Fair Lady. He was once a pyromancer who came to the Fair Lady asking for help, and she gave him eggs rather than knowledge, implying that the transactional relationship between the Chaos Covenant and its members could involve quite literal physical change. He provides access to the Covenant and sells items. He's also visually one of the most unsettling friendly characters in a game full of unsettling friendly characters. Fact 96. When you defeat the Bed of Chaos and return to Quilana, she thanks you. She says her mother has been freed. She says she'll leave now, and she does. She disappears from the swamp where she's been hiding for centuries. She's finally free to go somewhere, anywhere, that isn't a poison swamp below a ruined civilization built over her family's catastrophe. You never see her again. There's no happy ending for her, no triumphant return, no reunion with anyone who might have loved her. She just leaves. And somehow, that's the best thing that happens to any of the Daughters of Chaos. She gets to leave. Part 6, Artorias, Oolacile, and the Horror that came from a grave. Fact 97. The land of Oolacile was built on top of an ancient secret that its sorcerers eventually uncovered. Below the kingdom, buried and dormant, was the grave of a primeval human. Not an ordinary human, not even an undead, but something more primal. A fragment of the original dark soul given flesh, so ancient and so dense with the power of darkness that it had sunk to the bottom of the world. The sorcerers of Oolacile disturbed this grave at the suggestion of a serpent, almost certainly Kathi, who told them there was something powerful buried there. They dug it up, which woke it up, which made it very, very angry. Fact 98. Manus, father of the Abyss, is what the game calls this primeval human. But Manus isn't so much a name as a description. The Latin word manus means hand. He's described as a primordial human, the darkest of men, whose humanity went wild and produced the abyss. When the sorcerers disturbed his grave and dragged him back into existence, the darkness inside him exploded outward. The abyss is the dark soul at its most raw and uncontrolled, humanity stripped of the thin layer of civilization that makes it livable, spreading like a flood through everything it touches. Fact 99. Manus has a curious obsession throughout the DLC. He is searching for a broken pendant. When you pick up the broken pendant in the main game and use it, you're pulled back in time to Oolacile because Manus pulled you there looking for the pendant. He reaches through time to drag you to him. The pendant is implied to be connected to him, something of his, perhaps from his original human life before his burial. He has been awake for some time by the events of the DLC, and the first thing he wants is a piece of himself that got separated. Whether that makes him sympathetic or just more terrifying is something the game doesn't adjudicate. Fact 100. Manus in the DLC wields dark magic in a way that no other enemy in the first Dark Souls does. His attacks create a dark sorcery unique to him, his specific brand of corrupted power. In Dark Souls 2, 3 of the 4 daughters of Manus appear as boss characters in the DLC content, powerful beings who carry fragments of Manus's power. In Dark Souls 2's main story, Nashandra is revealed to be a 4th such daughter. Manus's power split when he was defeated, and each fragment took human form and scattered through time. The consequences of waking that ancient thing in Oolacile were so enormous that they created new human beings, new queens, new villains, in an entirely different era. Fact 101. The DLC area of Oolacile Township is visually one of the most beautiful and most disturbing areas in any Dark Souls game. The architecture is delicate and sorcery-themed, buildings that curve and spiral in ways that suggest knowledge in elevation. It should look like a place of wisdom. Instead, it's full of bloathead sorcerers, the corrupted citizens of Oolacile, whose heads have expanded grotesquely as the abyss poured in through the sorcerous lines they'd opened in their own minds. They wander the streets of their beautiful city, transformed, attacking anything that moves. The kingdom was doing exactly what it was designed to do, pursuing knowledge, developing magic, when the thing they woke up consumed it from the inside. Fact 102. The chosen undead's rescue of Princess Dusk of Oolacile is what the legend of Artorias claims he did. History recorded it as Artorias' deed. By the time of the main game, Artorias is famous specifically for rescuing Dusk. But Artorias didn't rescue Dusk. He failed. He went to Oolacile with Seath, was overwhelmed by Manus, shattered his arm, used his last clear-headed moments to protect Seath, and then became the corrupted thing you fight in the DLC. You rescue Dusk, you fight the possessed Artorias, you defeat Manus. And when you return to the main game's present, Dusk's only comment is that you look a lot like Artorias. History gave him your credit. You saved the kingdom and got nothing except the knowledge that sometimes the heroes in stories are the wrong people wearing the title. Fact 103. Oolacile is geographically connected to Darkroot Garden, the forested area in the main game where Seath guards Artorias' grave. The enchanted ember found in Darkroot Garden is described as a vestige of the lost land of Oolacile, confirming they once occupied the same space. What is now a wild garden full of darkroot mushrooms and Alvina the cat and Seath's tragic vigil was once a thriving human kingdom. Time in the abyss and centuries of regrowth have covered it entirely. The grave Seath guards is buried inside the landscape of a place that used to be Oolacile's heart. Fact 104. The design of the Chasm of the Abyss, the deepest part of the DLC and the place where you fight Manus, is remarkable for what it doesn't show you. It's pure darkness. The floor drops away. Little wisps of humanity float upward from below. There are no walls you can see. There is no ceiling. You're fighting in the void, in the actual abyss, with the father of it standing in the middle of that nothing, enormous and furious and very much not happy to see you. The fight against Manus is chaotic, fast, and overwhelming in a way that reflects his nature. He's not a boss who telegraphs cleanly. He's rage given physical form. Fact 105. The silver pendant, which you obtain by talking to Hawkeye Goff in his tower, is described as once belonging to Artorias. He was given it by Anor Londo as a reward for his previous feats against the Abyss and the dark wraiths of New Londo. It repels dark sorceries. When you use it against Manus, it pushes back his dark magic in a way that nothing else in the game does. It's Artorias' weapon being used by you to finish his fight. The game doesn't make a big deal of this. It just gives you the tool and lets you understand its significance on your own. Fact 106. The Abyss Watchers in Dark Souls 3 are the direct inheritors of Artorias' legacy. The undead legion of Farron ingested wolf blood to tie their souls together, mimicking the bond between Artorias and Seath. They wore wolf's heads. They dedicated themselves to hunting hollows and the darkness. They linked the First Flame as a collective, meaning the Abyss Watchers as a group are technically a Lord of Cinder. When you fight them, you fight a boss that includes multiple Abyss Watchers killing each other, because the wolf blood that bound them together also meant that when any one of them began to hollow, the shared soul started to corrupt the whole group. They were so thorough in their devotion to Artorias that they even reproduced his ultimate failure. Fact 107. The Old Wolf of Farron, which serves as the Covenant leader for the watchdogs of Farron in Dark Souls 3, is an enormous wolf that sits near the center of the Farron Keep swamp. Item descriptions suggest it may be connected to Seath, or to the wolf blood that the Abyss Watchers ingested to honor Artorias. Whether it's Seath after centuries, or a descendant, or simply a spiritual successor kept by the Legion as a symbol of what they aspired to be, the wolf is enormous, quiet, ancient, and clearly revered. It watches the swamp where the Abyss Watchers patrol. It has always been there. It will probably always be there. Fact 108. The way that Artorias' story is told across the first Dark Souls game, through the Covenant of Artorias Ring, through Seath's boss fight, through scattered item descriptions, through Dusk's dialogue, before you can even access the DLC content, is a masterclass in environmental storytelling. By the time you finally meet Artorias himself and see what actually happened to him, you have a complete picture of what he was supposed to be. The gap between who he was and what the Abyss made him is visible because the game spent hours constructing your image of him before showing you the truth. The tragedy lands harder because the setup was so complete. Fact 109. Kieran's decision to stay at Artorias' grave after his death means that, in a story full of people who kept moving long after they should have stopped, she is one of the only characters who simply chose to stop. The game is about forward momentum, about pressing on, about not giving up and going hollow. Siren gave up. She sat down and stayed. And the game doesn't condemn her for it. Her body at his grave is one of the few resting places in Lordran that feels chosen rather than imposed. Fact 110. The Abyss in New Londo is physically accessible to you via the Covenant of Artorias ring, which you get from Seath. Without the ring, dropping into the Abyss kills you. With it, you can navigate and fight the Four Kings. This is exactly how Artorias navigated the Abyss in New Londo before Oolacile. The ring is his method, made accessible to you. You're using a dead man's pact to survive in a place he once explored. The game is full of these moments where the tools and methods of people who came before are passed forward through death into new hands. Fact 111. Manus is the first example of what we'd later see developed more fully in Bloodborne, an ancient, buried entity whose power, when disturbed, expands outward and consumes its surroundings. The Abyss as a concept is essentially what happens when the Dark Soul is concentrated and untethered. Every human carries a piece of it. Manus was all of it, or close to it, and the Abyss is what spills out when that much Dark Soul has nowhere specific to go. In Bloodborne's terms, Manus is almost analogous to a Great One, an ancient being of immense power whose influence corrupts everything nearby. Miyazaki was working out ideas in Oolacile's darkness that he'd later bring fully into the light in a different game. Fact 112. Goff's farewell to you when you leave his tower is one of the kinder moments in the DLC. He wishes you well. He says something to the effect that you've done well, going up against what you're going up against. He doesn't ask you to stay. He doesn't ask for anything. He just sits in his tower, no longer able to see the world he's been asked to guard, and wishes a small undead traveler well on their way out. There are several moments in Dark Souls where a giant, powerful being quietly wishes you luck, and they land the way they do because the game is otherwise so relentlessly indifferent to your existence. Fact 113. The Darkroot Basin and Darkroot Garden, where Seath's boss arena is located in the main game, are also the area where you find the Stone Knight enemies and the cat Alvina, who runs the Forest Hunters Covenant. Alvina explicitly guards the path to Seath's arena, and item descriptions associate her with Artorias specifically. She was his friend. She has kept watch over his grave alongside Seath, maintaining a small, strange vigil over the burial place of a knight who died trying to save a kingdom that no longer exists. A cat and a wolf standing guard over a grave in a forest, long after everyone who would have understood why has either died or moved on. Fact 114. The full name of the DLC that introduced Artorias' story is Artorias of the Abyss, but it was titled Prepare to Die Edition for its initial PC release. The name Prepare to Die Edition became iconic in gaming as a shorthand for challenge and the expectation of repeated deaths. But the content itself is named after Artorias, after the fallen knight at the center of it all. The difficulty is the game's reputation. The story is a knight's. The things that made this particular piece of content famous are almost entirely separate from the thing that gives it its title. Part 7. The Wanderers, Merchants, and Fools of Lordran Fact 115. Solaire of Astora is the most beloved NPC in Dark Souls history, possibly the most beloved NPC in all of gaming within a specific generation of players. He's found near the beginning of the game praising the sun with total, uncynical joy. He wants to find his own sun, his own light, something to call his and carry forward. He offers to be your summoning companion for multiple bosses. He's warm, he's generous, he's slightly strange, and he represents something the game almost never offers directly: genuine, uncomplicated enthusiasm for being alive and being in the world. In a game full of hallowed ruins and cosmic tragedy, Solaire is simply happy, and his happiness is not presented as foolishness. Fact 116. Solaire's questline ends in tragedy if you don't take specific actions to prevent it. He becomes obsessed with finding his own sun, and eventually discovers a creature called the Sunlight Maggot deep in Lost Izalith, a small insect that glows like sunlight. It infects him. When you find him after the maggot has taken hold, he's gone hollow, mindlessly chasing the light he always wanted. He attacks you. If you kill him there, or if you never find a way to prevent the infection by killing the maggot before it reaches him, he dies having found something he mistook for the thing he was looking for. He got his sun. It wasn't what he thought it was, and it killed him. This is one of the most efficient summaries of the Dark Souls worldview in the entire game. Sincerity and passion are not enough to guarantee that the thing you find will be the thing you were looking for. Fact 117. The good ending of Solaire's questline requires finding the Sunlight Maggot in the ruins of Lost Izalith and killing it before Solaire encounters it. The maggot is in an area guarded by hidden baby centipede demons that are easy to miss. If you do find and kill it, Solaire remains lucid, retains his hope, and can be summoned for the final boss fight against Gwyn. In the base game, Gwyn cannot be fought alongside more than one summon, and the options are limited. Having Solaire there, golden armored and grateful and still looking for his son, fighting alongside you in the final room of the game, is one of the most emotionally satisfying optional outcomes in the entire series. Fact 118. Solaire was theorized by fans for years to be Gwyn's firstborn son, the nameless king in disguise. The theory was based on his gold armor, his connection to sunlight, his unclear origins, and his general demeanor as a noble warrior stripped of divine status. Dark Souls 3 clarified this. The nameless king is himself, in his own place, very much not Solaire. Solaire is simply a man who loved the sun. Whether this makes him more or less interesting is genuinely arguable. There's a kind of dignity in being a regular person who was completely, non-ironically devoted to something bright. Fact 119. Patches the hyena appears in Demon Souls, Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 3, and Elden Ring. He's a constant across the entire series. A treasure hunter, occasional cleric impersonator, and professional backstabber who pushes you into pits for your valuables and then tries to sell you items afterward. His arc in each game involves him being caught in something morally questionable, confronted about it, and squirming his way into a vendor relationship with you. He's the series' cockroach, surviving every world-ending event, every cycle of fire and dark, by being exactly flexible enough about morality to adapt to whatever situation he's in. He is also, and this is important, a genuinely useful merchant who feels genuine remorse about the whole pit-pushing thing. Fact 120. Petrus of Thorelund is one of the most quietly sinister NPCs in the game. He's a cleric, part of a group that entered Lordran together with Rhea, a maiden of Thorelund. When you meet them early in the game, they're a little group of religious travelers. Over the course of the game, one by one, Petrus's companions die or go hollow. If you're not paying attention, you might assume this is just the world being cruel. But if you look closely, Petrus is responsible for all of it. He abandoned his companions in the Tomb of the Giants, specifically so that Rhea would die there, because dead nobles from wealthy families passed their humanity to their heirs, and Petrus wanted that humanity. He murdered his own people for a resource. He's dressed like a priest, and he smiles pleasantly, and he is absolutely willing to kill you if you acquire Rhea's right of kindling and he decides you're a loose end. Fact 121. The crestfallen warrior at Firelink Shrine is the first person you meet in the game who tries to discourage you. He sits by the bonfire and tells you there's no point, that the undead curse claims everyone eventually, that whatever you're planning to do won't work. He's not wrong, exactly. He's seen a lot of chosen ones come through Lordran, and he's seen what happens to them. He eventually goes hollow himself, wandering down into New Londo ruins, mindless and aggressive. He was a person who looked at the situation clearly and made the reasonable conclusion that nothing could be done, and that conclusion hollowed him just as surely as any more active failure might have. The game suggests that giving up kills you just as effectively as fighting and losing does. Fact 122. Rickard of Vinheim is a sorcerer trapped in a cell in the New Londo ruins, which is already flooded and full of ghosts when you find him. He has been there long enough that he's made it work. He sells sorceries and upgrades your catalyst. He's cheerful about being locked in a cell in a ghost-infested flooded city. He says he's fine. He's clearly made a philosophical decision about his situation that he's not going to share with you, and you can respect it or not, but he's one of the few people in Lordran who seems to have found a functional equilibrium. Fact 123. Laurentius of the Great Swamp is a pyromancer who asks you if you free him from a barrel in the depths to help him find more pyromancy. He's enthusiastic, warm, easy to like. He can become your pyromancy teacher, but there's an end to his quest line that most players never see. If you acquire a chaos pyromancy flame before meeting him in Quelaag's domain, he notices it, loses his mind a little, and says he needs to find the Daughters of Chaos. He goes hollow somewhere between the swamp and where he was trying to go. The thing he wanted led him somewhere he couldn't come back from. Pyromancy was his passion and his ruin, which puts him in good company in Lordran. Fact 124. The undead female merchant who sits in the depths near the beginning of the depths area has one of the most stripped-back characterizations in the game. She sells basic supplies. Her dialogue is minimal. She has nothing about herself to tell you, no quest, no arc, no lore weight. She's just a person in a horrible place trying to make a small commerce out of it. There's something more human about that specificity than a lot of the game's more dramatically fleshed out characters. She's there because you needed items and she needed something to do. That's the whole thing. Fact 125. Dominal of Xena, the merchant who wears distinctive armor and eventually sells you the armor sets of several bosses you've defeated, is one of the more quietly meta characters in the game. He values interesting things and odd trinkets. He ends up selling you Ornstein's and Smuff's armor, Seath's crown, and various other items connected to defeated enemies. He's essentially a merchant who has built a business out of being present at the aftermath of extraordinary things, collecting what's left over and selling it back to people who want a piece of the legend. He moves to Firelink Shrine near the end of the game. He seems pleased with himself. Whatever else is happening in Lordran, commerce continues. Fact 126. Oswald of Karim, who appears hanging upside down in a bell tower in the undead parish, sells absolution from sin and items related to punishment and forgiveness. He's dressed in dark robes and has a very controlled, formal way of speaking. Item descriptions associated with him suggest he's a cleric of a god called Velka, who is the goddess of sin. Velka essentially runs a system for tracking moral transgression in the Lordran world. Oswald is her representative. He can absolve you of anything. Price varies. He doesn't seem to judge. He's a professional, which in the context of Dark Souls feels almost more unsettling than someone who would judge. Fact 127. The blacksmith Vamos in the catacombs is a skeleton who has kept his shop running long after death, deep in one of the more terrifying areas of the game. He's cheerful. He sings to himself. He upgrades fire weapons. He has no explanation for why he's a skeleton in the catacombs, no apparent backstory, no quest. He's just there, doing his job, and he seems fine about it. There are a few characters in Dark Souls who seem fine about things they absolutely should not be fine about, and Vamos is a senior member of that group. Fact 128. The merchant Shiva of the East appears as part of the Forest Hunters Covenant, but has a sinister edge that most players miss. He has a bodyguard who shadows him at all times, standing exactly where the merchant stands when you're not in the right menu. Shiva will try to buy your unique weapons from you, offering souls in exchange. If you sell him a unique weapon, you lose it permanently. And if you acquire the Chaos Blade, Shiva becomes hostile, and his bodyguard attacks you. The implication is that Shiva is not simply a collector. He was after the Chaos Blade specifically, and having acquired it through your loss, he no longer has any use for the relationship. Fact 129. Oscar of Astora, the knight who gives you the Estus flask at the very beginning of the game and dies shortly after, is actually the second chosen undead you encounter. When you first begin Dark Souls, you're in the cell in the Northern Undead Asylum. Oscar is the one who breaks the window above you and drops the corpse that has the key to your cell. He's already dying when you first interact with him. He gives you everything he has, the flask, the mission, and the few words of information he still has in him. He apologizes for the burden he's passing to you. He has been carrying this duty for who knows how long, has made it all the way to the asylum to break you out. And he does it at the very last moment, before the effort kills him. The game starts you off as someone who receives a sacrifice, as someone for whom someone else paid a cost you weren't even awake to witness. Fact 130. The concept of the Estus flask itself is worth sitting with for a moment. Estus is the name of the liquid in the flasks you use to heal throughout the series. The word Estus has roots in Latin, meaning heat or glow, connected to fire, connected to the flame. Your healing item is literally a drink of fire. Every time you restore your health, you're drinking something that is in the game's cosmology, connected to the first flame itself. The lore of the flask is simple. It draws on the power of bonfires, and its strength is improved by kindling those bonfires with humanity. Your health in this game is fire. Your healing is fire. The thing that keeps you moving is the same thing that set the whole catastrophe in motion. Fact 131. Moved section. Let me continue the NPCs section first. Fact 130. The Firekeeper, Anastasia of Astora, who sits in silence behind iron bars beneath Firelink Shrine, has one of the most understated tragedies in the game. She had her tongue cut out by the village she lived in, accused of blasphemy. She was then imprisoned below Firelink Shrine, mute, immobile, tending a bonfire she cannot leave. She never speaks while she's alive. You only hear her voice after you've killed Lothric, retrieved her soul, and restored her to life, at which point she thanks you quietly and says she can finally die as a human. The whole arc of her life is a person being punished for speaking, silenced, and restored only when the person who valued her silence is gone. Firekeeper souls in Dark Souls are described as holding swarms of humanity beneath just a thin layer of skin, drawing humanity to the bonfire like a fire draws moths. She was kept alive because she was useful. What she wanted was never the point. Fact 131. Knight Lothric of Karim is one of the most quietly villainous characters in the game, and the game barely flags him as a villain at all. He's locked in a cell in the Undead Parish. If you free him, he rewards you, and can even be summoned for a boss fight. He seems helpful. He seems friendly. Then he murders Anastasia and takes her soul. He has two companions in Anor Londo who fight alongside him when you invade his world. He never explains himself. His armor description says he forsook everything for the goddess Fana, whose ring he wears. Whether this is devotion or rationalization is never clear. What is clear is that he killed a mute, imprisoned woman and carried her soul around as either a resource or a trophy. The game hides his motivations so thoroughly that over a decade of player analysis hasn't produced consensus on what he actually wanted. Fact 132. Crossbreed Priscilla, the enormous half-dragon NPC in the painted world of Ariamis, tells you don't have to fight her. She tells you that the world you've entered, the painted world, is a place that outcasts and abominations come to be forgotten, and that if you want to leave, she'll help you go. She's gentle. She's enormous. She has a scythe that turns invisible when it coats itself in her blood. She's been placed in the painted world because she exists as a crossbreed between dragon and something else, which the gods considered wrong. She asks you to leave without fighting her, and you absolutely can. The game gives you a peaceful exit from her presence if you want it. According to developer interviews, Priscilla was originally intended to be the main guiding NPC of the game, similar to what the Emerald Herald became in Dark Souls 2. She was meant to stand in Firelink Shrine and help you understand your purpose. Instead, she ended up in a painted world for things that didn't fit anywhere else. Even within development, she was displaced. Fact 133. The painted world itself, Ariamis, is a location created within a painting, a separate reality accessible only through a specific painting in Anor Londo. The world inside a painting presumably exists because someone painted it into existence, someone with the ability to create worlds through art. The connection to the painted world of Arayendel in Dark Souls 3 and the painter girl who is working on a new painting at the end of the third game suggests that painted worlds are a recurring feature of this cosmology. Art creates reality here. The painter isn't making a picture of a place. She's making the place. Dark Souls 3's final DLC is about ensuring that the next world, the next painted reality, comes into being with care and intention rather than being whatever the old world leaves behind. Fact 134. Rhea of Thorolund has one of the most comprehensively miserable questlines in the game. She's a noblewoman and cleric who travels to Lordran with a mission and 2 bodyguard scholars. Petrus, her other companion, abandons her and the scholars in the Tomb of the Giants deliberately, leaving them to go hollow. You can rescue her from the tomb, but if you do, she'll eventually be captured by Patches, then rescued again, and then, if you've acquired what was once her mission item, attacked by Petrus who decides she's become a liability. Or she'll simply hollow on her own somewhere in the undead parish if you take too long. She came to Lordran on a mission of faith and died for it multiple times through the specific malice of people who claim to be on her side. Her fate is a case study in what happens when you trust the wrong companions in a world where trust is already a dangerous luxury. Fact 135. The Darkroot Garden, home to the Mushroom People, the Stone Soldiers, the Hydra, and Alvina the Cat, is one of the more obviously magical areas in the game. The Mushroom People are described as the forest guardians of Darkroot, beings who grew from the earth in the vicinity of powerful magical forces. Their design, enormous round caps, round body, stubby limbs, is absurd and somehow endearing. They move slowly and hit extraordinarily hard for their appearance. The White Mushroom Person, a smaller variant that appears occasionally and just wants to help you by dropping items, is a small mercy hidden in a forest of things that want you dead. Someone in development thought the enormous garden of monsters needed at least one gentle little mushroom who just wanted to give you moss. Part 8, Drangleic, Vendrick, Nashandra, and the Curse That Never Ends, Gict 136. Dark Souls 2 takes place in Drangleic, a kingdom built by King Vendrick upon the ruins of several previous kingdoms. This is one of the more explicit acknowledgments in the series that the cycle has happened before. Vendrick didn't build on open land, he built on graves. Every kingdom in this world is constructed on top of the ashes of the one before it. Drangleic is simply the most recent layer of the same story. Fact 132. Vendrick founded Drangleic alongside his older brother Aldea. The two had different priorities from the start. Vendrick was a builder, a king, someone who wanted to establish something lasting and protect his people. Aldea was a researcher, obsessed with understanding the fundamental rules of the world, specifically the curse that hollows undead and the cycle of fire and dark that no kingdom had yet managed to break. They worked together until their methods diverged so completely that Vendrick locked his brother away in his estate. Aldea kept working. His research continued until it transformed him into something that can't properly be described as human. Fact 133. Nashandra is one of the most insidious villains in the series because she achieves everything through manipulation rather than direct power. She appeared to Vendrick as a beautiful and mysterious woman, became his queen, and slowly guided him toward every decision that would eventually destroy his kingdom. She convinced him to invade the giants across the sea to claim their power. She encouraged his ambitions in ways that fed her own. She was, the game eventually reveals, a fragment of Manus, father of the Abyss, given human form, one of the pieces of his shattered power that took on personhood and traveled through time, seeking the souls it craved. She was drawn to Vendrick because he was powerful. She wanted to consume what he had. Fact 134. Vendrick's response when he finally understood Nashandra's true nature is one of the more tragic details in the series. He didn't fight her. He didn't expose her. He took his most important possessions, put them somewhere she couldn't reach them, and fled to the undead crypt to hollow in exile, knowing that the kingdom was already lost and that anything he did from that point would only make the suffering longer. He chose to disappear. He chose to let her have the empty throne rather than fight for a victory he couldn't achieve. When you find him in the crypt, he has been walking in slow circles for what seems like forever, his massive frame no longer connected to any purpose, waiting for nothing. Fact 135. Defeating Vendrick requires collecting giant souls from creatures scattered across Drangleic. Each giant soul you carry halves his defense. Without any, he has 32 times his base defense, making him effectively unkillable in any normal time frame. This mechanic is a direct statement about the nature of his power. The giants he waged war against are literally the key to defeating him. The sin he committed in their invasion lives in their bones and their power, and it weakens him when he has to face it. His victims are his counter. The game builds the moral weight of his choices directly into how you fight him. Fact 136. The memory of the king, accessible using the Ashen Mist heart on Vendrick's discarded armor in the crypt, shows you a version of Vendrick as he was before he went hollow. He speaks to you from within his own past. He calls himself no king. He says he is more fit to be a jester. He regrets what he did to the giants, what he allowed Nishandra to make him do, the cost his ambitions imposed on people who had done nothing to deserve it. He is not at peace, but he is, in his way, honest. It's the clearest version of him you get. A man who built something he was proud of, was manipulated into destroying it, and carries the weight of that without the comfort of being able to blame anyone but himself for the choices he made along the way. Fact 137. Aldrich's transformation, by the time you encounter him in Dark Souls 2, is one of the most visually striking in the series. He appears as a giant charred human head surrounded by fire and ancient tree branches with a single glowing red eye. He is barely humanoid anymore. He refers to himself as having stepped outside the cycle, having removed himself from the system of fire and dark, having become something that can exist without participating in what everyone else is trapped in. Whether this makes him free or simply means he traded one prison for a different one is genuinely ambiguous. He cannot die when you defeat him. He loses the fight and then addresses you from the ash of his defeat. Fact 138. Aldrich is the only boss in the entire Dark Souls series who does not die when defeated and who drops no souls. You fight him, and when you win, he's still there, still talking, asking you what you want. He offers you a third path, not linking the fire, not sitting in the dark, but simply leaving, walking away, refusing to participate in the cycle at all. Whether this is wisdom or cowardice is something the game deliberately leaves open. But the fact that the only character in the series who seems to have genuinely escaped the cycle is a giant head on fire in an empty throne room gives you some sense of what that escape costs. Fact 139. The undead curse in Dark Souls 2 is depicted differently from the first game. In Dark Souls 2, dying repeatedly causes your maximum health to decrease, and the only way to restore it is by using an effigy, a carved human figure that represents human form. This mechanic makes the act of losing your life feel more cumulative, more erosive, in a way that mirrors the lore. Every death takes a little more of what makes you yourself. The effigy restores it temporarily, but you'll keep losing it, because that's what this world does. Fact 140. The three daughters of Manus appear in Dark Souls 2's DLC content. Alana the Squalid Queen in the Crown of the Sunken King. Nadalia, Bride of Ash, scattered in pieces across the crown of the Old Iron King. And Alsana, Silent Oracle, in the Crown of the Ivory King. Each of them represents a different facet of Manus's original power, a different aspect of what dark, ancient, raw darkness becomes when given a human heart to organize it around. Their stories are sad in a way that mirrors their origin. They're pieces of something that got shattered, trying to be whole things in a world that keeps breaking. Fact 141. The Crown of the Ivory King DLC contains one of the most affecting moments in any Dark Souls game. Alsana, the daughter of Manus who has become the Oracle of the Ivory King, has been working for thousands of years to contain the abyss spreading beneath the Ivory Realm. She is not trying to destroy it or stop it. She is trying to feed it just enough of herself to keep it in place. She is a fragment of darkness herself, and she is spending herself, piece by piece, to keep a worse darkness from consuming everything. When the Ivory King himself returns, he doesn't fight you. He stands with his 4 knights against the abyss that his kingdom opened. He faces his own mistake with total composure, and Alsana, the woman who kept his kingdom contained at enormous personal cost, watches him go. Fact 142. The final boss of the base game of Dark Souls 2, Nashandra, is fought in the Throne of Want, the literal center of the game's power. She wants that throne more than anything, which is why she spent the game nudging everyone toward it. When you defeat her, you can sit on the throne yourself or walk away from it. Sitting links the flame. Walking away begins the Age of Dark. In the Scholar of the First Sin version of the game, if you've met all of Aldea's conditions, he appears after Nashandra's death and offers you the 3rd option. This is also a throne room. The options are still the same as they have always been: fire, dark, or something else entirely. The game has cycled once per title, and every time the choice at the end is structurally the same choice. Fact 143. The ancient dragon in Dark Souls 2, found at the top of the Dragon Shrine, is explicitly an artificial creation. It grants you the Ashen Mist heart that allows you to enter memories. It speaks in formal, distant tones. Every piece of lore surrounding it suggests it is not a true dragon. It was built, constructed, placed there to serve a specific purpose. By whom? The game suggests Aldea was involved. A false dragon built to grant a specific tool to a specific type of traveler, maintained at the summit of a shrine dedicated to dragon worship, serving a function while the genuine dragons of the world's past are either dead or standing quietly at the bottom of the sea. Fact 144. The Emerald Herald, who serves as the narrator and guide figure in Dark Souls 2, is herself a creation with a specific origin. She was made by Aldea from a dragon's scales and a human soul. She has no natural lifespan. She exists to serve the purpose Aldea built her for, guiding the bearer of the curse, providing them with the ability to level up and the context they need to find the path forward. When her purpose is complete, she says she doesn't know what she'll do. She's never had a life outside of this one purpose. Aldea made her to send chosen undead toward the throne. He didn't include instructions for what she should do when that was finished. Fact 145. The giants in Dark Souls 2 are described as massive, nearly featureless beings, with trees growing from their heads and an absent, sorrowful demeanor. Their king, the Giant Lord, led the retaliatory invasion of Drangleic after Vendrick captured and experimented on the giants he brought back from their homeland. Their attack was motivated by grief and vengeance, not conquest. They didn't want Vendrick's kingdom. They wanted the people he had taken to be released. And they lost. The game contains their memories in the visual language of Hyda's Tower of Flame, a ruined ancient structure connected to a civilization that predated Drangleic. History doesn't just repeat in this world, it accumulates. Fact 146. One of the most subtle pieces of lore in Dark Souls 2 involves the 4 old bosses and their primal bonfires. The Rotten in the Black Gulch, the Lost Sinner in Sinner's Rise, the Old Iron King in the Iron Keep, and the Duke's Dear Freya in Brightstone Cove represent 4 great souls, echoes of the original Lord souls that have been incarnating in some form in every era. The Lost Sinner is described as someone who tried to relight the first flame against all wisdom, an echo of the Witch of Izalith's catastrophe. The Rotten is an accumulation of the dead, an echo of Nito. The forms change. The failures are the same. Fact 147. Vendrick's ring, the King's Ring, is described as a ring of the King of Drangleic that seals certain areas of the kingdom. To get it, you have to take it from his hollow body in the undead crypt. You're reaching into the slow, wandering shell of a king to take the last remnant of his authority so that you can open the doors he closed. There is no dignity in this for him. There is no recognition. He walks his circles. You take the ring. He barely reacts. What was once a man who built an entire kingdom from the ruins of the ones before, it has been reduced to a vending machine for an item you need to progress through a door. Fact 148. The ending of Dark Souls 2 that involves collecting the lost crowns of the old kings and bringing them to Vendrick is one of the more quietly hopeful moments in the series. He blesses them. He infuses them with something that makes the bearer of the curse immune to hollowing while wearing any of them. He gives you something useful, something that matters, in the last lucid act of a man who has been wandering hollow for so long that the act of bestowing something feels almost impossible. He is, briefly, a king again. Then the moment passes, and he returns to his circles, and you keep what he gave you. Part 9. Lothric, the Ashen One, and the World's Long Twilight, Fact 149. Dark Souls 3 begins with a premise that is explicitly a result of the cycles of the previous games. The first flame is fading yet again. Lords of Cinder from previous eras have been resurrected to link the flame once more, but most of them have fled from the duty or refused it outright. 3 of the 4 great Lords of Cinder are found in places they've retreated to rather than where they're supposed to be. Yhorm the Giant in the profaned capital, Aldrich in Anor Londo, and the Abyss Watchers in the Farron Crypts. The 4th, Ludleth of Corland, is the only one who stayed, sitting on his throne in the Firelink Shrine, with his legs burned away by the fire he chose to link. He's the only one of the 4 who did what was asked, and the game presents this not as heroism, but as simple, quiet consistency. Fact 150. The Unkindled, which is what the Ashen One is, are defined in the lore as undead who tried to link the flame and failed. They were too weak, and the flame consumed them without linking. Their ashes were buried in the Cemetery of Ash, and they were forgotten. When Prince Lothric refused his duty and the 4 Lords of Cinder fled their thrones, the Unkindled were resurrected as a last desperate measure to retrieve them. The player character in Dark Souls 3 is someone who already tried and failed once. Everything you're doing is a second attempt at something you couldn't manage the first time, fighting for a duty with power that already proved insufficient. Fact 151. Aldrich, Devourer of Gods, began his existence as a clergyman with a terrible secret. He ate people. He consumed human flesh in enormous quantities, and the power of those devoured souls accumulated inside him until he became a flowing mass of dark sludge, animated by the thousands of souls he'd consumed. He was canonized by the Church of the Deep, which apparently reframed his cannibalism as a religious practice. He became a Lord of Cinder through sheer power. The Church forced him to link the flame, and he did, because he was strong enough to. After being resurrected for Dark Souls 3, he had a vision of a coming age of the deep, and he decided that instead of linking anything, he would devour the gods themselves and accelerate that age. He marched on Anor Londo and consumed Gwyndolin. His boss fight includes Gwyndolin's hands still reaching from within his body, still casting miracles, still not quite dead. Fact 152. Yhorm the Giant is one of the most explicitly tragic characters in Dark Souls 3's roster. He was a hero to his people, a ruler who kept the profaned capital safe through his own strength. He agreed to become a Lord of Cinder as an act of sacrifice for others, not himself. Before he left, he gave his friend Siegward a weapon called the Storm Ruler, a blade specifically effective against giants, and told Siegward to use it on him if he was ever resurrected and had lost himself. He knew he might not come back as himself. He gave his friend the means to end him because he trusted Siegward's judgment more than he trusted his own future self's autonomy. The Storm Ruler is the boss's own counter. He handed it out before the problem began. Fact 153. Siegward of Katarina, who carries on the Katarina knight tradition from Siegmeyer and wears the same round layered armor, is the character who fulfills Yhorm's request in Dark Souls 3. His questline involves him tracking down Yhorm and honoring his promise. If you help Siegward through his entire quest, he reaches Yhorm's arena with you and fights alongside you using the Storm Ruler. When Yhorm dies, Siegward drinks his Estus, sits quietly, and says he's done what he promised. He fulfilled his oath to a dead friend. He drinks and rests, and the game implies this is as close to peace as Dark Souls ever offers anyone. Fact 154. Pontiff Sulivan is one of the most important background figures in Dark Souls 3, responsible for an enormous amount of what you're dealing with, even though his role is primarily as a single boss encounter. He was born in the painted world of Ariandel, left it, found the profaned flame in a tundra beneath what would become Irithyll, and used that flame's power to conquer the city of Irithyll and install himself as its ruler. He gave himself the title of Pontiff, which means something like High Bishop or Pope. He fed Gwyndolin to Aldrich. He sent his knights, equipped with rings that slowly transformed them into feral beasts, to Lothric to destabilize its royal court. He likely convinced Prince Lothric not to link the flame, which caused the entire crisis the game is built around. He's responsible for nearly everything wrong with the world of Dark Souls 3, and he's not even its final villain. Fact 155. The Outrider Knights that Sulivan created, including Vort of the Boreal Valley and the Dancer of the Boreal Valley, were given rings specifically designed to transform them over time. The rings granted combat power, but slowly overwrote the wearer's humanity. Sulivan deployed these knights to foreign lands, knowing they would eventually become beasts, ensuring they could never turn against him. Vort is already a slobbering, icy monster by the time you find him. The Dancer is still recognizably human in form and movement, but she's fighting you against whatever remains of her will. The Dancer was apparently a distant relative of the gods, one of the few remaining connections to Gwyn's bloodline, and Sulivan used her as an entertainer, and then a knight, and then sent her to transform in a cold hallway. Fact 156. The Dancer of the Boreal Valley's move set, with her enchanted swords, mirrors Sulivan's exactly. Dark magic in one hand, fire in the other. Her weapons are literally described as symbolic of her vows to him, enchanted as his were. She is doing what he did with weapons that echo his. She is his reflection in someone else's body. This is either a sign of deep devotion on her part, or evidence of how thoroughly he imposed himself on everyone who served him, making them echo him even in their fight patterns. Fact 157. The Church of the Deep, which Aldrich founded and which provides much of Dark Souls 3's religious infrastructure, is presented as a corruption of the Way of White, the original religious organization associated with Gwyn. The Deacons of the Deep still wear clergymen's robes. They still use miracle-adjacent magic. They still walk in processions and maintain a cathedral. But what they serve is the Deep, which is described as a form of the Abyss, a corruption of darkness that grows in stagnant, accumulated humanity. What Aldrich built was a religion dedicated to the thing that was going to consume civilization, founded by someone who experienced the divine through consuming people. The cathedral is beautiful. The thing it worships is horrifying. Fact 158. The consumed king, Osiros, was once a scholar king who became obsessed with the divine after finding the royal family's archives contained references to Seath the Scaleless and the possibility of becoming a dragon. He attempted to transform, exposing himself to so much Seath-adjacent research and crystal sorcery that he lost his mind and began transforming. He was also apparently experimenting on his own children in this period, attempting to produce something divine from his bloodline. His boss fight has him raging about a child named Oolacile, apparently his youngest son, invisible, whom he's cradling against his chest. Whether Oolacile exists or is a delusion born from his experiments is never confirmed. He is in his final moments, both a king who wanted more than his kingdom could give him, and a father who cannot find his child in his own hands. Fact 159. Prince Lothric and his brother Lorien are among the most interesting characters in Dark Souls 3, precisely because Lothric, whose fate determines everything, is almost entirely passive. He was born frail, prophesied to be a great lord of Cinder, kept isolated in the Grand Archives with scholars and tutors, raised with a single purpose, to link the flame and extend the Age of Fire one more time. He simply refused. He decided he would not participate. His older brother Lorien, who had his legs crippled in battle and cannot stand, crawls to protect his younger brother, fights on his behalf, and carries Lothric's weight both literally and metaphorically through their boss fight. They are two people who should never have been put in this position, one who won't do the thing required, and one who can't walk but won't let his brother face it alone. Fact 160. The final boss of Dark Souls 3, the Soul of Cinder, is described as a manifestation of all the souls of everyone who ever linked the first flame. Every Lord of Cinder, every unkindled who managed it, every small human who kindled a bonfire in the deepest dark, all of it accumulated and shaped into a single guardian. Its first phase cycles through the playstyles available in the original Dark Souls, mimicking weapons and magic and power stances in a sequence that clearly evokes specific character builds from the first game. Its second phase plays Gwyn's theme and uses Gwyn's moveset. You're fighting everything that came before. Not just Gwyn, but every iteration of every sacrifice in the entire cycle. The final fight of the series isn't against a villain. It's against the accumulated weight of every choice that was ever made to keep the fire burning. Fact 161. The endings of Dark Souls 3 are 3 in number. You can link the fire. You can take the fire as a servant of the dark. Or, if you have completed Yoel and Uria of Londor's quest line and acquired a specific ending item, you can summon the Painter Girl from the Ringed City DLC's storyline, allow her to use the new Flame of the Dark and the First Flame together to paint a new world, and step away from the throne entirely. This last ending is called The Usurpation of Fire, and it's the most hopeful of the 3 in a very quiet way. The painter is going somewhere new. You're leaving the old world behind. Whatever comes next doesn't have to be fire or dark. It can be painted. Fact 162. The Ringed City, the final DLC of Dark Souls 3, takes place at the literal end of the world, in a time the game describes as after everything else has ended. You're dropped off the edge of the world, and you fall into the last city, the Ringed City, where Filianor has been sleeping in the innermost dark, waiting for a father who never came back. The Ringed City is inhabited by the Ringed Knights, humans who were marked by Gwyn with the dark sign early in the Age of Fire, the first people cursed, the first undead, sealed away in this place at the end of time, so that the dark that naturally gathered in humans would be contained there rather than spreading into the world. They have the dark sign. They have dark rings around their bodies. They have been here since before the Age of Fire properly began, forgotten, contained, used as a solution to a problem that Gwyn never admitted he'd caused. Fact 163. Gale, who appears across both pieces of Dark Souls 3 DLC and serves as the final boss of the Ringed City, is perhaps the most heroic figure in the entire series and one of the most straightforwardly kind. He is looking for the dark soul of humanity, the original dark soul of the furtive pygmy, which he needs to give to a young painter so she can paint a new world with it. The dark soul has been distributed across humanity for so long that collecting it requires consuming enough of humanity to absorb it. Gale travels to the end of time, consumes the Ringed Knights, absorbs the blood of the old world, and waits for you to come and end him so that his accumulated power can be extracted and used. He does this because a child asked him to help her paint something beautiful, and he said he would. He's an old soldier who found a purpose that mattered. Fact 164. The fight against Slave Knight Gale is widely considered one of the greatest boss fights in gaming history. It takes place at the edge of a blood-red desert at the end of the world, under a stormy sky with a lightning-struck structure visible in the distance. Gael has absorbed the blood of the old world, and it has changed him, made him enormous and wild, his cloak tattered and massive, his movements quick and brutal. He never stops moving. He never takes a rest. He has been waiting for you at the end of everything. And when you finally arrive, he's grateful in his way, because your arrival means the thing he came to do can finally be finished. Fact 165. The Painter Girl in the DLC paints throughout both pieces of Ariandel and Ringed City content. She's quiet, unassuming, trying to create something beautiful from the old world's remains. She needs something from you. Specifically, she needs the dark soul, gathered from the blood of those who carry it, so she can paint a world with it. A world that would be cold and gentle rather than burning and dying. A place where new things could grow. She is the most hopeful figure in the entire series. She's making something. Everything else in Dark Souls is a story about maintaining something or losing something. The painter is making something new. The whole 3-game series ends with a child with paint-covered hands looking at a blank canvas. Fact 166. High Lord Wolnar in Dark Souls 3 was a conqueror who wore the crowns of every king he defeated as a symbol of his dominance over death. Fact 166.5. The profaned capital is one of the most devastatingly sad environments in Dark Souls 3. It was a city consumed by the profaned flame, a fire described as a curse, a fire that refused to go out because it fed not on wood or humanity but on the suffering of the living. Every living thing in the profane capital was burned. Yhorm, who was meant to protect that city, became a Lord of Cinder specifically to try to stop it, offering himself as fuel for the first flame in a desperate attempt to give the city's tragedy some purpose. It didn't save the city, but it gave its destruction a kind of sacrificial weight that Yhorm chose to carry on behalf of everyone who had already been taken. The Dancer of the Boreal Valley is found in a specific location in Lothric Castle that is connected to the first area of the game by a locked door. The lore reason the door is locked is fascinating. The Dancer was sent by Selivon to contain the Puss of Man infection in Lothric, blocking the way out of the starting area. Her presence as an early door in the game and a late boss you return to represents the full arc of Lothric's tragedy. She was keeping the infected in and the Ashen One out, a cordon around a dying kingdom. The Abyss Watchers boss fight involves multiple Abyss Watchers simultaneously, one of them glowing red-eyed and attacking the others. The red-eyed one is a Watcher so far into the corruption that it has turned on its own brothers. This happens because their shared soul means the corruption spreads. But the red-eyed Watcher attacking its fellows actually helps you. It distracts the others, buying you time, dealing damage to your enemies. Even corrupted, even lost, the Abyss Watchers are fighting. They just don't know anymore what they're supposed to be fighting. The form of their devotion survives after the substance has rotted away. The Cathedral of the Deep, which contains the curse-rotted Greatwood and serves as the base of the Church of the Deep, is a genuinely beautiful space turned to terrible purpose. The architecture is grand, soaring, clearly designed with reverence in mind. It was built for something worthy of reverence. Then, Aldrich's people moved in, and what had been a place of genuine faith became a charnel house for something that should never have been worshipped. The deacons still go through the motions. They still walk in processions. They've simply replaced the substance of their belief with something that eats it. The way the timeline of Dark Souls 3 relates to the first game is intentionally unclear. By the time of Dark Souls 3, Anor Londo still exists, but changed. Lordran no longer exists by that name. Kingdoms have risen and fallen multiple times. The game suggests thousands of years have passed, but also that time in this world is not linear, that places and people from earlier eras can persist or echo forward in strange ways. This deliberate blurring of chronology is part of what makes the series feel like myth rather than history. Myths don't have clean timelines. They have recurring figures and repeating shapes. And the Dark Souls series is a collection of myths about the same failure happening in different clothes across an indeterminate stretch of time. He was not afraid of death. He was not afraid of the dark. He was afraid of the abyss. When the abyss found him and consumed him, it did so completely because Wolnir had no defense against the thing he'd never thought to defend himself from. His boss fight is one of the most visually striking in the game, a massive skeletal figure in complete darkness, pale white with golden bracelets, thrashing in panic, the abyss pouring from him in clouds of black smoke. He conquered everything. The one thing he couldn't conquer found him at the bottom of a pit and never let him go. Part 10. The Deep Lore. Cycles, the Pygmy, Fire, Dark, and What Everything Means. Fact 167. The dark soul that the furtive Pygmy found is described across item descriptions as something fundamentally different from the other Lord Souls. The other three souls were sources of specific power: light, death, fire. The dark soul is the soul of humanity itself, the raw material from which human consciousness and human darkness are both drawn. The Pygmy didn't wield it like the others wielded theirs. He distributed it. He broke it into fragments and scattered it across the human race, giving a piece of the original darkness to everyone, which means that every human being who has ever lived in the world of Dark Souls carries a shard of what once was the most powerful dark force in existence. Fact 168. Gwyn's fear of the Dark Lord is specifically the fear of what human beings might become if they were allowed to realize their inheritance. The Dark Lord, in Kathi's telling, is the human being who embraces their dark soul fully, who doesn't suppress it or burn it in a bonfire, but claims it and with it claims the age that should naturally follow the age of fire. Gwyn created the undead curse partly to ensure that humans would be consumed by their own darkness before they could organize it into something that threatened his order. The curse is a preemptive weapon against an enemy he was afraid might never appear if he kept them busy dying. Fact 169. The concept of humanity in the 3 Dark Souls games evolves considerably. In the first game, it's a resource and a fragment of the Dark Soul. In the second, it's connected more to the cycle of dying and persisting. In the third, the concept of the deep extends it. The deep is what humanity becomes when it accumulates without fire, when it pools and stagnates in the dark. The Church of the Deep worships the consequences of too much humanity for ending in one place. The abyss is what happens when individual humanity concentrates to a point of critical mass. Fire keeps humanity spread out, burning small and separate. Without fire, everything dark wants to flow together. Fact 170. The serpents, Frampt and Kyathi, have been manipulating the cycle for longer than any human civilization has existed. They are both described as primordial serpents, ancient beyond measure, with interests that are not human interests dressed in human language. Frampt wants the Age of Fire to continue. Kyathi wants the Age of Dark. Neither of them is asking you to help because they care about you. They're asking because you're useful to their goals, and the language of destiny and prophecy is the most effective tool they have for getting useful people to do useful things. The game trusts you to eventually notice that both serpents are giving you the same kind of urgent personal appeal, and that this should make you suspicious of both of them. Fact 171. The cycle of fire and dark is described in Dark Souls 3's opening as something that has been repeating for so long that the terms themselves are almost meaningless. Fire and dark, light and dark, it doesn't matter what you call it. It fades, it renews, it fades again. Worlds rise on the ashes of previous worlds. Kings build on graves. The only things that persist are the few beings who have found ways to exist outside the cycle, and none of them seem to find it comfortable. Aldia exists outside the cycle, and he is a burning head in a throne room. The everlasting dragons exist outside the cycle, and they stand motionless at the bottom of the world. Persistence is possible. It is not obviously better than the alternative. Fact 172. One of the more extraordinary pieces of cross-game lore in Dark Souls 3 is the Soul of Cinder's connection to the chosen undead of the first game. In its second phase, the Soul of Cinder specifically uses Gwyn's moveset and plays Gwyn's theme. The implication is that Gwyn is in there, that every person who ever linked the flame is in there, including potentially the player character from the first game. You are fighting yourself, or you are fighting what you might become if you link the flame again. The circular horror of this is one of the most elegant things the series ever does. The final challenge of the third game is made of the victories of the first. Fact 173. The Pygmy Lords in the Ringed City are multiple kings, multiple descendants of the furtive Pygmy, who have been sitting on their thrones in the innermost dark for longer than most things have existed. They are small, gaunt, ancient, each one wearing a thin crown and sitting in a high chair in a hall built for beings smaller than the gods. They don't attack you. They don't acknowledge you much. They are simply the accumulation of a bloodline, sitting at the end of the world, being exactly what they were made to be. The furtive pygmies overlooked forgotten people, still there at the edge of everything, waiting. Fact 174. The architecture of the Ringed City is built in layers, with the oldest structures at the bottom and more recent additions stacked on top, so that as you descend through the DLC, you're literally moving backward in time. The deepest, oldest parts of the Ringed City contain imagery and design that predates the Age of Fire, that connects to the primordial period before the flame existed. The city was built at the end of the world, but its foundation reaches all the way back to the world's beginning. In Dark Souls, everything circles back. Every bottom leads to an origin. The past is always there if you go deep enough. Fact 175. The final thing to understand about the world of Dark Souls is that it is not a world that wants to be saved. It's a world that has been saved repeatedly, and the saving never lasts, and the attempt always costs more than the saving was worth. Every kingdom, every king, every loyal knight and obsessive scholar and desperate clergyman, they have all been trying to fix something that doesn't want to be fixed. The cycle doesn't stop because someone has good intentions. It doesn't pause because a chosen undead is strong enough. It continues because it's what the world does. The first flame burns, it fades. Someone links it. It burns again. Every noble sacrifice extends something that was already ending, and yet the game makes you care. It gives you Sif limping at the end of a fight she didn't want to have. It gives you Siegmeyer falling asleep in a poison swamp. It gives you Gwyn playing a sad piano song while a hollow king fights without knowing why. It gives you Artorias with one good arm left and a wolf still alive because of him. It gives you Quilana in a swamp, waiting for someone strong enough to end her mother's suffering. It gives you a painter with clean hands making something new at the end of an old world. The story of Dark Souls is a story of a world trying to die, and all the extraordinary things that happened while it was trying. Every candle that burned in that darkness was worth lighting, even if it burned out. Every person who stood up in that world and decided to press on was worth following, even if they went hollow in the end. Some fires fade faster than others, but they were warm while they lasted. And sometimes, somewhere, a painter is still painting. Sleep well, the bonfire can wait. If you've made it this far, or even if this has been quietly playing in the background while you drift off, thank you. This kind of deep dive lore exploration takes real time to put together, and knowing that someone out there is listening makes every hour of it worth it. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing and leaving a comment below. Tell me which piece of lore you never knew, or which character you've always thought deserved more attention. Your comments shape what gets covered next, and they genuinely mean everything. Rest now. The hunt, and the fire, and the dark can all wait until morning. Bonus observations: the small things that make the world. There are a handful of smaller, stranger details that deserve a moment before we close. Things that don't fit cleanly into any category but have stayed with players for years. The bloodstain mechanic, where you can see a ghostly image of how other players died near a location, means that Lordran is technically haunted by the deaths of everyone who has played before you. Every red stain on the ground is a moment someone failed. The world is full of ghosts of other people's bad decisions, and if you're smart, you learn something from each one. If you're not, you make the same mistake and add your own ghost to the collection. The way that messages left by other players function in Dark Souls is one of the most beloved features in the series. Written in the game's own scripted vocabulary, they can be warnings or lies or jokes or genuine kindness depending on who left them and why. Some messages are placed to mislead you toward danger. Some are placed to guide you to something wonderful. A few are placed simply to say something human in a world that is otherwise overwhelming with inhuman scale. Someone once put a message in the kiln of the first flame that just said brilliant, and players have reported seeing it for years, like a small note of encouragement left by a stranger for every subsequent traveler who made it that far. The ring system in Dark Souls rewards attentive players with rings that tell complete stories in 3 lines of description. The wolf ring tells you about Gwyn's faith in Artorias. The Covenant of Artorias tells you about the deal he made to walk the dark. The Ring of the Sun's Firstborn tells you that Gwyn had a son who fell from grace before you even know the Nameless King exists. Almost every ring is a small piece of lore compressed into a mechanical reward. The game gives you things that help you survive, and the same objects tell you the story of the people who used them first. The design of the Chosen Undead's character creation screen at the very beginning of Dark Souls has always been a quiet statement about who you are in this world. You're not given a name. You're given an appearance and a starting class, and then you're dropped into a prison and trusted to figure out the rest. You are, in some sense, a body and a purpose, waiting for the world to tell you what you're for. Everything else you become is earned through play, through death and learning, and the accumulation of experience in the most literal possible sense. The character you have at the end of the game is the product of every choice you made under pressure. Dark Souls builds its player character through suffering rather than selection, and what you get is yours in a way that a character you design from a menu never quite is. The Firelink Shrine is designed as a space that changes as you complete sections of the game. NPCs arrive, NPCs leave. The space fills up and empties out. When Anastasia is killed, the bonfire goes dark. When you restore her, it lights again. The area responds to your actions and to time's passage in a way that makes it feel genuinely inhabited. It is not just a hub. It is a home of sorts. The one place in Lordran where you can pause and take stock and hear something other than the sound of things trying to kill you. The game understood that you needed somewhere to rest. It just also understood that rest is temporary, that things go wrong while you're resting, and that coming back to find the fire gone is a specific kind of loss that nothing else in gaming quite replicates. One of the quietest, most affecting moments in Dark Souls happens if you go back to the Undead Asylum near the end of the game. The Asylum is the tutorial area, the first place you ever fought an enemy, the place you escaped from at the start of your journey. When you return to it, it's still there. The giant demon in the courtyard, which you probably killed easily now compared to how overwhelming it was the first time, is back. The cells are as you left them. The only new thing is a crow perched somewhere unexpected, and the sense that a very large amount of time has passed since you were last here, even if it was only a few hours of real time. The game built an area that could function as a tutorial and as a kind of memorial. Coming back, it is a chance to measure how far you've come, and how much has been lost in the distance between there and here. The kiln of the first flame, the final area, is deliberately simple. After everything you've been through, everything the game has thrown at you, the final stretch to the last boss is a corridor, a few black knights, and a staircase. No elaborate traps, no environmental storytelling to decode, just a quiet walk towards something inevitable, with the charred armor of Gwyn's fallen knights watching you pass. The simplicity feels earned. The game has been complex and punishing and full of depth, and it ends with something almost ceremonial, a walk to meet a king who has been waiting 1,000 years for someone to come and end it. And then the piano begins. The fight against Gwyn, and the silence after it, is not a triumph. It's more like a conversation ending. You've come a very long way to stand in a very dark place and put out a fire that was never going to burn forever. Everything the game built, every knight and scholar and king and witch and wolf, all of it pointed toward this room, this moment, this quiet piano playing over a hollow king's last fight. It is one of the most melancholy final moments in all of gaming. It asks nothing from you except presence. It doesn't need your cheers. It just needs someone to be there, to witness, to finish what was started. Lordran is a world in its last light. All the extraordinary things that happened in it, all the legends and betrayals and devotions and disasters, they happened on the way to this, a fire burning itself out. And you, small and undead and stubborn, standing in the ash of someone else's everything, making one last choice in the dark. That's the world of Dark Souls. 175 facts, 1,000 hidden details, an entire civilization's worth of story, compressed into item descriptions and environmental design, and the expressions on wolves' faces during boss fights you never wanted to have. And underneath all of it, one quiet question that every soul who picks up a controller in Lordran eventually has to answer for themselves. When the fire goes out, what do you do? Whatever you decide, decide it consciously, with full knowledge of the cost, with eyes open, even if the dark is all there is to see. Good night.